Welcome to the CAL-ALHFA annual meeting. It's wonderful to have you with us. People are still joining, but I'm going to get us started with a brief introduction to CAL-ALHFA and what we can expect today. My name is Mary Ellen Shea. I am the Executive Director of CAL-ALHFA, and I am delighted to welcome you to what I think is going to be a very, very interesting day and a landmark in CAL-ALHFA's organization, in that this is going to be an opportunity for us to really set our legislative agenda for 2022 in conjunction with Senator Wiener and the Senate Housing Committee. So this is an exciting day for us to be talking about state programs and policy and how we can influence the direction of both in upcoming legislative and program year in 2022. Many of you were with us yesterday, and it was a very interesting and robust conversation about single family ownership opportunities and ways in which they can expand ownership opportunities for minority, people of color constituencies. One of our attendees called it inspiring, and I have to say I would agree. Today, I think, will be no less inspiring. The CAL-ALHFA, as you all know, was founded in 1989 by local agencies who issued their own mortgage revenue bonds. But as times changed, we didn't have as many local issuers in our organization. When the tax credit program came into operation, CAL-ALHFA refocused its activities on the tax credit program, and of course continued its activities with the state housing programs. We've always worked very closely with CAL-ALHFA, and as well as HCD and the newer programs in the Treasurer's Office. So this is a long-standing organization. Our point of view has always been to represent what is doable and good for local agencies in the affordable housing development process. One of the themes I think you'll hear today is that there's sometimes a disconnect between good intentions at the state level and actual implementation at the local level. And I think Senator Wiener is very, very cognizant of this, and I think it will be important and exciting for us to be working with him directly in forging a better bond between state mandates and local implementation and local priorities. So that's a little bit about CAL-ALHFA. This recording will be mounted on our website. Today's webinar will be mounted on our website, and it will also be shared with Senator Wiener's staff, as well as the Chief Consultant for the Senate Housing Committee, Allison Hughes, who will be joining us in our third hour at 11 o'clock. So I encourage all of you to pose your questions and make your comments in the certain knowledge that all of this will be shared with the people who make it all happen. I would like to turn it over to Wendy DeWitt. She is our CAL-ALHFA president, and Wendy will talk a bit more about what's happening today and introduce you to our sponsors.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. And thank you for that introduction, kind of framing what we want to accomplish today at our webinar. What I will do right now is give everyone sort of an overview, a brief overview of how the day will unfold. As Mary Ellen mentioned, we will start with keynote remarks. And then following the keynote remarks, we would like to get your feedback, your impressions, how things are going in your jurisdiction, because we, our mission is to represent you. So we want to hear from you. Following the keynote remarks, we'll have a state programs panel where we'll hear from representatives of our affordable housing's 4 main state agencies: the State Department of Housing and Community Development, the California Housing Finance Agency, as well as both the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee and the Debt Limit Allocation Committee. This panel will talk about the accomplishments of 2021, and a lot of things are happening. And we'll also tap them for their insight on what they expect for 2022. Following the state programs update, our legislative panel is where we'll get some what we call upfront, close, and personal insight from key consultants and legislative advocates on the highs and lows of 2021, the goods and bads, where the affordable housing agenda is headed in 2022. It's always a very robust discussion, and we really encourage all of our participants to jump right in there. It's a great opportunity to ask direct questions. And as Mary Ellen said, we will record the sessions and make them available for everyone afterwards. So before we get started, I would like to express our gratitude and thanks to all of our sponsors, beginning with our title sponsor for this conference, the Golden State Finance Authority. Golden State has been our steadfast sponsor of CAL-ALHFA activities for many years. Golden State is a California Joint Powers Authority and a recognized public entity that's been a leader in both multifamily and single-family finance in California over 2 decades. Golden State has provided over $128 million in down payment assistance, grants, and helped over 17,000 homeowners make energy efficient upgrades to their homes. Our gold sponsors include the San Diego Housing Commission, a model public agency, creating innovative programs and providing housing opportunities for individuals and families. R4 Capital, a national affordable housing syndicator with over $15 billion of low-income housing tax credit equity investments, representing over 200 corporate investors. The Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, a cooperative wholesale bank enabling direct borrowing from the global capital markets, making low-cost financing available to its member institutions to help meet community needs. Life Steps, providing comprehensive social services to the residents of affordable housing communities so that they are empowered with the skills, resources, and support to maintain stable housing and break the cycle of poverty. Our silver sponsor is Innovative Housing Opportunities. Stable, vibrant communities start with housing. IHO takes a creative approach with innovative solutions and services that are tailored to the communities in which they serve to provide high-quality housing to those most in need. And our bronze sponsors, the California Housing Finance Agencies. CAL-HFA is the state's original affordable housing lender and provides financing and programs serving low to moderate rental housing, as well as first mortgage loans and down payment assistance to first-time homebuyers. CAL-HFA is a self-supporting agency as its bonds are repaid by revenues generated through mortgage loans and not taxpayer dollars. Mogavero Architects, public participation in planning design adds immeasurable value to the built environment. Mogavero Architects has extensive experience in consensus building and collaborative decision-making with public agencies, private organizations, and individuals. Mogavero's goal is to add value to its clients' efforts and enhance the quality of communities. And Notification Maps, a new sponsor for CAL-ALHFA, providing radius maps, public notices, mailing, and printing services. Notification Maps can help you with regulatory or community noticing quickly and accurately. So that concludes our day overview. And once again, I want to provide the utmost thanks and gratitude to our sponsors. So to kick things off, I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ellen so she can introduce our keynote.
Thanks, Wendy. Senator Scott Wiener is not able to be with us in person today, but he did send us a pre-recorded video that talks about the accomplishments of the last legislative cycle and is a call to action to us as CAL-ALHFA. Senator Wiener was born in Philadelphia and grew up in Southern New Jersey. He earned his BA from Duke University and his JD from Harvard Law. He spent a year in Chile on a Fulbright scholarship. Before his election to the Board of Supervisors, he worked as a litigation attorney and deputy city attorney. He served as chairman for the San Francisco Democratic Party and is leader in the San Francisco LGBT community. He's authored a number of first-in-the-nation laws, including mandated fully paid parental leave for all working parents, requiring water recycling and solar power in new developments, and banning public school spending in states with LGBT hate laws. He co-authored legislation which aims to change laws that make it a felony to expose someone to HIV without their knowledge. Scott has lived in the Castro district in San Francisco for over 21 years. His legislative interests include housing, no surprise, transportation, energy, health, human services, LGBT issues, environmental protection, and education. So Sherry, I'll ask you to run the video. When it is concluded, I'll give a very short recap of our response, and several of the CAL-ALHFA board members have also had an opportunity to view the video, and they'll be offering some of their comments as well. So let's hear from Senator Wiener, and then let's prepare to talk about what he has to say and how we can implement those ideas. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Senator Scott Wiener. I have the honor of representing San Francisco and Northern San Mateo County in the California State Senate, and the honor of chairing the Senate Housing Committee. Thank you for having me today, and I look forward to the day when we are in person together. We have had an eventful year of housing this year, particularly passing SB 8, 9, and 10, but it really fits into a broader context of the significant advances we've made in the legislature around housing in the last 6 or 7 years. We've taken some significant steps to have better housing accountability, whether it's ensuring that cities are allowing accessory dwelling units, whether it's strengthening the state affordable housing density bonus to allow for more density along with affordable housing, whether it is streamlining the approval process with SB 35 or SB 330. We are all sorts of steps to make it easier to address California's found multi-million home shortage, which is causing so much damage to our residents, to our economy, to our climate efforts. We have to turn things around. And this year we took a significant step with passing SB 8, 9, and 10. As you know, SB 8 strengthens and extends the Housing Emergency Act, SB 330, which streamlines the approval process. SB 9 legalizes duplexes and lot splits throughout the state. And SB 10 gives cities a powerful new tool to zone for small multi-unit buildings up to 10 units in a much faster, more streamlined way. These are 3 important laws that will, over time, have a positive impact in California. We have to make sure they're implemented well. And that primarily means working with local government to make sure that they are taking advantage of SB 10, which is a voluntary tool. And I think a lot of cities will want to do that, and the more encouragement they have locally, the better. And then to make sure that SB 8 and SB 9 are being followed. We're already seeing some efforts underway to try to undermine SB 9, trying to think of loopholes and tricks. And I think it's important for people to encourage their city government not to do that. We want to make sure that all of our state housing laws are being followed. We're doing more work to try to have better accountability. More and more groups that are monitoring local happenings at city councils and planning commissions to look for violations of state law and to make clear that when we pass these laws, we mean it, that you have to follow these laws. And in fact, we just funded the creation of a new unit within the Housing and Community Development Department, a unit that will be about educating and holding accountable, monitoring what's happening at the local level, and having accountability when cities are violating the law. If they're unintentionally violating the law, then it's about working with cities to rectify the situation. If it's intentional and flagrant, that may require enforcement action or litigation by the state. We also have more and more groups that are filing private lawsuits against cities. It's not just up to developers to file a lawsuit. We have nonprofits that are doing that as well. And of course, none of us wants to engage in litigation. Litigation should be a last resort, and I look forward to the day when we don't need litigation to enforce state housing laws. But unfortunately, we're still in a position where there are not every city, there are plenty of cities that really work hard to follow the law, but there are more than a handful of cities that either very brazenly violate state law or do it in a more understated way, but violate state law nonetheless, and outrageous interpretations and so forth. And so we're very focused on making sure that we enforce the law, and that the state has a role to play in that, but local communities do as well, because residents have an obligation, I think, to be engaged at the local level. Not an obligation, but we should, people should, I hope, be engaged at the local level and hold local communities accountable for following the law. Finally, we need to do a better job collecting data, because that's going to help us enforce the law. The governor, unfortunately, vetoed my housing data collection bill this year, but I'm hopeful that through administrative action, the executive branch will adopt some very strong data collection measures next year, because we need to have a better sense of how state laws are being implemented, how they need to be strengthened, how they're working or not working, and how they're being followed or not followed. So again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to working together as we move forward.
Unmute, Mary Ellen. Can't hear you. We missed your first couple sentences.
Sorry, I thought I hit it.
There we go.
Okay. What I said was, thanks, Senator Wiener. We look forward to working with you too. The sound on my computer was a little bit garbled. I hope it was better for the rest of you. But I have prepared some feedback comments that I've also shared with Cassidy Denny, who is the legislative aide for housing issues in Senator's office, as well as with the chief housing consultant, Allison Hughes, who I mentioned earlier, will be participating in our 11 o'clock hour. Basically what Senator Wiener said is that we had 3 pretty big wins in local housing activity this year. That was SB 8, which is a continuation of the emergency streamlining legislation that was passed by Senator Skinner in 2018. It just allows processes to go a lot faster. It was originally passed to help the Santa Rosa area recover from the horrible fires of 2018, but it was since extended throughout the state and has been used extensively to streamline that development process. That's had a lot of good effect in local agencies. but there have been some complications that some of our members are going to talk a bit about. The other bill that was passed is SB 9 by Senator Atkins, and that allows duplexes to be built in what were previously single-family residential districts, single-family residential only. This was, it's not really that big a deal. The number of duplexes that are probably going to be built under the aegis of this law is probably not going to overwhelm single-family neighborhoods, but the opposition grabbed hold of this bill as well as SB 10, which allows some development of up to 10 units in certain specified urban areas as the end of single-family zoning as we know it. The opposition pretty much described this as an opportunity for unscrupulous developers to go into low-density neighborhoods and turn them into high-density neighborhoods with all kinds of traffic and pollution and overcrowding conditions. As it happened, both bills passed significantly and the governor signed, and the impacts are not going to be that enormous individually, but it's a cumulative effort to expand the land use opportunities so that we can build more affordable housing. If you don't have the land, you can't build the units, obviously, and increasing density is a good outcome for many reasons, environmentally, from social aspects, education, transportation. These are just these are good outcomes, and so the passage of these three bills was exciting. There are a number of other bills that were passed with regard to housing. We're not going to talk about them today because our emphasis really is on those that impact local agencies in particular. What Senator Wiener was also talking about is the creation of a new unit in HCD that will assist local agencies that are having compliance difficulties in working through these, rather than taking the litigation approach or the confrontational approach that has sometimes been the mode of negotiation. Senator Wiener is trying very hard, as is HCD, to create an atmosphere of mutual trust and compliance and achieving mutual goals. I would very much like to see CAL-ALHFA participate in the development of this compliance unit and work with HCD very, very closely to find a system that can reward those good actors. There is some money available in some communities lack the resources to be able to develop a streamlined system. There is some money available for them to do so. We'd like to work on this emerging new unit at HCD that I think has potential to bridge some of the gaps that we have seen. Senator Wiener is also encouraging us to join forces with our other local advocates, including the California Housing Consortium and California YIMBY, who will be joining us in our third hour as well. I could not agree more that CAL-ALHFA needs to strengthen its relationships with all of our local housing advocates and also with our nonprofit sponsors and our nonprofit housing development entities, our consultants, and the other membership within CAL-ALHFA. Allison made a particular point when we were talking yesterday that we should become much more active in the actual legislative process. And in a way, it's easier to do that because of the pandemic. Remote participation has become much easier, and people can actually speak out in favor or in opposition of bills at legislative hearings from the comfort of their home office. It's a system that works pretty darn well, and it truly lets everybody have their say. You don't have to come to Sacramento. You can state your opinion, and it is heard and recorded. by the folks who are making this legislation. So I'd like to institute a series of trainings with some of the capital advocacy and training groups to help our CAL-ALHFA members become experts in participating in that legislative process from day one. You'd be participating in the first policy committee hearing for any of the legislation that you find of interest. The last thing that Senator Wiener was talking about is something that I know he's planning to reintroduce, and that is his data collection bill. The idea that legislation is built without knowing exactly what we already have and how it's working together is something that is of concern to us locally, because a lot of bills get passed with great intentions, but there is not a lot of research into how these bills interact with each other, and quite frankly, how successful they are. We've got a lot of laws on the books that add to the requirements of the housing element, for example, but we don't know really how effective these housing element requirements are actually being in the development, ultimately, of affordable housing. Strengthening the housing element has been something that CAL-ALHFA has always supported, but I think strengthening the housing element will be even easier when we can point to happy results as a result of those changes in housing element implementation, as well as the introduction of new laws and requirements in the housing element. Those are some of the things that I took away from Senator Wiener's presentation. I'd like to turn it over to Wendy to monitor the conversation. Several of our board members, as I mentioned, I think do have some comments that they would like to make. I also encourage all of you in the audience to send your comments and questions into our chat. Wendy will be observing those and will recognize and comment on them as appropriate.
Mary Ellen, this is Rochelle. We
Hi,
do
Rochelle.
actually have a question in the Q&A from Jennifer Seeger, and she asked, were there any updates or plans on abolishing Article 34?
I don't know, but let me, I'm taking a bunch of notes of the things that we need to follow up. And what we'll do is get back to you with a summary of all of the questions that come up today that we don't have information on.
That's a good question. I would like to know the answer to that one as well, because I know we were following that, and it sort of, fell into the black hole somewhere.
Yeah. I do know what happened in the last legislative session. They just didn't have the votes to get it onto the ballot in 2022. That they just didn't have it. So rather than try to force an issue and create some further backlash, they decided to let it ride until a more favorable political climate emerges. But I don't know what it stands right now.
To kind of build on some of the things Mary Ellen said in her introductory remarks, Senator Wiener's description of these three bills that have been passed, that basically are directions to local jurisdictions to change their zoning laws and help increase housing density. We're all trying to pump up housing production to meet the needs that we see coming. So, but as with every state mandate, it does mean that the local jurisdictions now have to take that back and change their local codes, adopt new provisions, maybe adopt new programs, Or if you have a suite of programs, such as in San Diego, you then have to take that state law and look at it and see how it overlaps. Make sure that you've included the provisions and the intent of the new state law, and then kind of see, now that you have those new requirements, how do your programs now work? And if they are additive, what does that mean? I know I've noticed that additive programs can result in maybe unlimited density in a number of situations. And is that going to be a good thing that will really stimulate some development? Are we going to hear community concerns? At the local level, there's always that balancing of neighborhood character and infrastructure, as Mary Ellen also brought up. So those are things that we would like to hear from the local jurisdictions. And if there are any issues with implementation, that CAL-ALHFA can carry these things back, that we can help you become more directly involved in the process. So if there are any of those kind of concerns out there, please enter those into the chat, and we can discuss, or at least have that in our repertoire of items that we want to take back to the legislators. Let's see, I think maybe we may have some CAL-ALHFA members with questions. Not certain, but we'll take those now. If we'll give you a minute. Let me check. Let's see, in the chat, we have a question.
I see those. How will SB 9 and SB 10 generate affordable housing? They don't in themselves. Those two bills were just designed to increase the potential density available, but there were no affordability requirements, primarily because that comes after the fact. You've got to have the density available before you can actually develop affordable housing. So there are no affordability provisions by design. And I think you're right about the math. If you do subdivide a single family lot into two portions, you could come up with as many as 4 units. The idea is a duplex on each lot. So if you've got a lot that's big enough to divide into two, then you could come up with as many as 4 units.
Then I see another comment in the chat. How about affordable units? And I think this means, are there affordability requirements on any of these new units? And I don't believe that's the case.
No. That's also a local decision. These new laws were passed by the state just regarding the density. The other consideration was whether or not the locals wanted to have a special affordability requirements on these new pieces of property. So it's up to the locals. It's not a part of the state mandate for SB 9 and 10.
Great. Let's see if we have any other questions pop up. Hearing none, we can conclude our keynote session. We'll give just another moment here.
Michelle, I
And-
thought you had some comments that you wanted to make.
Okay. Not seeing it in the chat and not hearing the comments, so let's move on to our state panels. If we do have some additional questions pop up, we can always address them after the state panel. But we will keep our eye on the chat in case any new comments come in. But what we'd like to do now is we'll move on to our state program panelists. And I will provide some introduction here while we go through the logistics of getting our next panel up on the screen.
I think, Wendy, we do have a question from Julie Romy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, with the push to increase density, what is being done to ensure there is also open space? Kaiser Marston Associates have recently worked on a proposal to convert a golf course to residential units, and I have read a recent article that this is a new trend. However, cities may be counting public courses toward their open space area. Density also brings up new issues. Now, that is so true. Julie, do you want to go on the mic and talk a little bit more about this and what your experience has been? I can see that she's down there.
We'll see if we can get her on, but
I don't know, what's your experience in San Diego with this? There's always the conflicts of competing demand for uses. Wendy?
yes, competing demand for uses and definitely open space. You know, folks are very sensitive to that, and I know our planning department has come up with some very creative ways of encouraging open space in their new Complete Communities program. So, but yes, it is something that is often left out. So I see both Julie and Rochelle on now. So Julie, do you want to expound on your comment a little bit more?
Sure. We just find that often these the density push is something that is a hair trigger reaction out of local jurisdictions because they have to deal with the fallout of it. And I understand why these things are being enacted, but I think the state could maybe help by also making sure they are dealing with some of the issues that come from density. That, you know, especially suburban cities that really, you know, to get a 4-story building causes people to have vapors. That this is a big deal, and you know, you can't come at it from the viewpoint of everyone is like San Francisco or LA, and I think that's sometimes not felt at the local level. And I think if people had a better understanding of that, maybe density could work, it could be worked in easier without so much backlash if some of the real concerns that people have aren't just kind of waved aside. So that's kind of what I've seen on the local level. And that golf course, that city, that was actually a huge part of their open space, which is actually also a state mandate. So here they were having, they're getting pressure to do housing, but they also have the pressure of having open space, and they're a built out city. So it's something that, you know, we can't just be thinking of all this as just kind of myopically, but we need to be looking at it, how it reacts in the whole community, how it affects the whole community.
That's a very good point. Appreciate that, Julie. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, this is Rochelle Mills. We've got a large audience here, and I know that the audience is bubbling with creativity. We'd love to have your input. I'll be fielding those questions. You can put them in the chat. You can put them in the Q&A. This is a great opportunity during this conference to speak directly to folks who can get the answers. And so if we don't have the answers for you right now, Mary Ellen can certainly reach back and get those answers out to you either later on during the conference today, or if you put your information into the chat, we can send that to you. And this is an opportunity for a shameless plug. If you are not on our mailing list, that means you're not a member of CAL-ALHFA. And so we want to make sure to take care of that. All of these answers, we do regular state and federal updates. We've got a knowledgeable board that is across the state. So I guarantee you that your particular demographic will be served by the members of our board. And if you don't see it and you are a dues paying member, there is room for you on the board as well. So please feel free to share your questions, share your comments, and we'd be happy to answer those. I have one because recently online or on the news, when that condo catastrophe happened, I remember we were talking as nonprofit affordable housing developers in the rental space. We have been really interested in moving people into ownership. And that brought an acute conversation around condos versus home ownership or other home ownership models. Is there an opportunity for creativity now? Seems like COVID has allowed us to change the rules a little bit. There's a little bit more receptiveness to something different. What are you finding, Mary Ellen, in the policy and the legislation towards finding new ways to move people into home ownership, particularly since we recognize that that's one of the key ways of breaking generational poverty or building generational wealth?
We certainly talked a lot about this yesterday, and I have to say that the folks in the private sector are way ahead of the state with regard to legislative or program policy activities in home ownership. One of the big things that has recently reemerged is co-housing as a way to solve some of the problems that were pandemic induced. The fact that so many parents have had to either quit their jobs or take a lower paying job in order to provide childcare for their children who are no longer in daycare or in school during the pandemic opened up a whole new way of trying to take care of our kids and put money in our pockets at the same time. And co-housing has been a form for a while, but it has blossomed in the last year and a half with folks who are maybe not necessarily living together, but living in close proximity to each other, taking turns watching the kids, taking turns in providing meals that are delivered to other folks in this co-housing space. It's not something for everyone. You've got to have a tolerance for meetings that talk about maintaining public space and private spaces. You've got to all be willing to talk about the responsibilities that a home ownership board takes on. This is true, of course, with condos and other co-op type housing, but the idea that it's cheaper and better for someone who was a nurse practitioner to give up that job and stay home because they couldn't afford the $2,500 a month infant care that was required.
Mhm.
It strikes me as a loss. We need nurse practitioners. We don't need somebody taking a low-paid job as a telemarketer because they can work at home and avoid paying $2,500 for childcare, which incidentally is staffed by workers who are probably making less than $15 an hour. So that the disconnects among the various social systems that became very, very obvious in the pandemic, I think, can be the foundation for some new ways to look at things. That's a really great question, Rochelle. I know another one of our members is on the board, right? Of our board is on the call right now. Nick Friend has worked a lot in innovative development technologies, construction technologies that save both time and money. So I'm putting you on the spot, Nick.
No,
There
that's
he is.
fine. Yeah, no, we've spoken about co-housing and past conferences, and I think yeah, this time has all taught us that creativity is, we're bound by code. We're not going to change building codes. We're not going to ever follow the half a house movement that has worked in parts of Central America, where you get a concrete shell and then it's up to the resultant owners to fit out the building the way they want. It's a personal dream of mine, but I realize not everyone shows up with a bag of tools. And so I think people have been forced to get to rethink space. I think California presents some particular challenges in a lot of its urban centers with how to deploy pre-built ADUs. I think that adds complication. In a lot of other communities, you can truck them in and place them in a backyard, and in places where you either have shared driveways or garages, there's not an opportunity always to crane a unit behind and immediately set things. So I think, I come from the nonprofit lending landscape. I think always our challenge. And I know there's another CDFI represented on the board who has made more impact in this space, but I think it's challenging to get these kind of creative plans up to a scale where a lender can participate and have it be standardized enough and acceptable to a city. It's kind of this whole bubbling confluence of circumstances that have to come for these to gain velocity. I think on the other side, we're seeing directly addressing multifamily, more and more modular options are available. And I think the pitfalls are well known. There have been several early companies who have kind of realized that it is taking the most challenging parts of manufacturing and the most challenging parts of construction and smushing them together at the pain point of affordable housing, with the possibility of delivering units faster and thus more cheaply. But I think, some great strides have been made. Rick Holliday has proven that you can get the unions to talk and come to some agreement about how to produce these. You have production specialists like Caleb Roop proving that, you can deliver units if you are open and transparent about providing them to the marketplace. I know he's been really successful with that effort, and I'm really encouraged by that out in Idaho, servicing the California market. And I think developers are taking note, and lenders. So, it's nice that there's growing acceptance around it, growing understanding too about initial deposits required for those and how to include those in financing. And I think hopefully there becomes a density of modular builders such that if there's an issue with one, you have another production schedule to jump onto to maintain your project timeline. So those are the big themes I'm seeing.
I want to put one of I'm looking through the audience, and I want to put one of our folks in the audience on the spot, and that's Christy Thomas from Morgan Hill. because you're in an area where there is a lot of dollars flowing. Maybe we can, if you're interested in can join us on this. Certainly we're jealous in Southern California because we feel like all of the money, all of the tech money is coming, staying in Silicon Valley, but we're feeling the hurt in Southern California. And I'm really curious what if you are seeing with these funds or with the squeeze in the market, an opportunity for creativity. And Christy, certainly respond in the chat if you are able to join the conversation. We'd love to have you do that. In the meantime, we have a question that came from Jim Bergdahl, and it's regarding the question that I asked about condos. And he asked, has there been any investigation of legislation to help make condos more feasible from a liability standpoint? And that's a great question, because that's where I mentioned the idea to my real estate development team, and they said, absolutely not, the liability is too great. And so he says he's heard that there's still a lot of hesitance in the development world. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah.
And Christy, we have opened up your mic. So if you are there and would like to comment, we certainly welcome.
Hi, everyone.
Okay,
thanks for
wonderful.
letting me share. How is everyone doing? I was trying to type frantically, but that's okay. So yeah, there are definitely a lot of dollars that have been coming in from tech funds for sure. And there's been a lot of creative thinking. We recently, as a city, just got a grant for 3 years to create a position for an unhoused case manager, because that's one thing that we'll see in some of the cities that are smaller besides San Jose and San Francisco. There's not a lot of services. So a lot of times when the housing is built, there aren't a lot of services to help necessarily the folks that need more resources. So we are working really hard to collaborate with the county and probably not so much the state, but definitely with the county to get more resources into South County. And we're kind of working as a trying to be a regional partner with Gilroy as well, and doing things together. We have a safe park that is run by Gilroy Compassion Center, which is in Gilroy, but also with our faith-based community and then our funding. And we have Measure A funds that have come. I feel like Measure A funds are were collected from our county residents though. And that's really where we are seeing more developments come to Morgan Hill or from those county funds.
What's Measure A funds?
So Measure A, I want to say it was a county measure to collect money to bring affordable housing to Santa Clara County. And we had the first project, UHC The Crossings, which was 39 units. And I believe 16 were permanent supportive housing units. There were 16 units, I think, that the city had a little more control of. Just we could say, hey, call our safe park first, or, that sort of thing. And we have another development that's coming online that also will serve some veterans. And then we have this new development that we're so excited of, because it's one of the first in South County, is for ag workers. So about, I think 17 of the units are being set aside for ag workers. So there's a lot of creative thinking for sure, and a lot of partners working, and yeah, things are moving forward. We do need more transportation though. That's one thing we'll say. We had a project come through that is an SB 35, but they're really not close enough to transit. And our transit literally has 2 stops a day in and out at Caltrain. So we have the Caltrain station, but we don't have the service. So we definitely need more transportation. And if we had more transportation, it would make it so much easier on everyone.
Well, thank you for joining in. And I would like to encourage everyone, if you can look in the chat, you'll see that she's the only one who identified her affiliation with Morgan Hill. We'd love for each of you to click on your names, add your affiliation to your chat. As we are going through this conference, we'd love this to be interactive. And if I recognize the name or organization and we'd like to pull you into the conversation, we'd love to be able to do that. I also want to make a comment that Pam Berkowitz, who's on our board, and she's from the Silicon Valley Housing Trust, she said that Measure A was a $100 million bond measure that was passed in the county of Santa Clara in 2016. And we are going to wrap up this session and get ready for our next one. I'll let Wendy close us out, but I will tell you that we have made sure to leave time for everyone to get up, stretch their legs, grab some water, but we want to see you back. So don't go too far. We have a lot of really wonderful program afterward. Wendy, I'll leave it to you to close us out.
Great, thanks, Rochelle. And yes, we are going to work in some very brief breaks so that you can go get a drink of water. What's up next is our state programs update. We're going to hear from HCD, California Housing Finance Agency, and as well as TCAC and CIDLAC. So let's take a break right now for 5 minutes. So we want you back a little bit before 10:05. So let's break. Thank you.
Okay, my IT guy has
Wendy's going to be moderating our next panel, but I had a couple of announcements I wanted to make before we get into our state programs update. The first is that CAL-ALHFA will be holding its annual meeting in person next year at the Capitol Plaza Holiday Inn in downtown Sacramento. It's October 26th and 27th. Exactly the same days as the virtual meetings have been today. And we are really looking forward to seeing everybody again in person. The DOCO, as we call it, our downtown arena area, is a really jumping place right now. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a Kings basketball game being played during the time of our conference. So there's plenty of activities after the conference takes place. I also wanted to mention that this webinar is the second of at least 4 that we have planned for the 2021-2022 year. We're going to do some additional webinars with regard to single family home building and ownership opportunities. We are going to be partnering with the California Association of Realtors and with minority lending organizations who did such wonderful presentations yesterday and putting together these webinars. And they are going to be geared to smaller suburban communities who may not have the resources at their fingertips the way these statewide lenders do. And so what we're hoping to do is put together the resources and the people who need these resources in a much more systematic, not haphazard way. We'll be working, as I said, with the mortgage bankers as well as with the Association of Realtors and the minority lending community to put that all together. We're also planning to do a webinar on a new multifamily rental program. It's called the Middle Income Housing Program, and it has been widely supported. We believe that there are some pros and some cons to this program that need to be more adequately resourced and discussed. And so we're going to be put together an informational webinar on the Middle Income Housing Program that actually buys existing multifamily housing and makes rentals reduces rentals to make them affordable for the middle income housing cohort. So those are a couple of the things that we're going to be doing. And the sponsors that we are so grateful for having will be sponsors for all of our webinar series. I have one last comment on webinars, and then I'll turn it back to Wendy. And that is, if you'd like to see something talked about in specific, co-housing and the problems with condo development being two obvious examples, let us know. And even better, if you'd like to help put it together. We have the technical resources, thanks to Sherry and Jackie and Rochelle for being our behind the scenes puppet masters here, to help you put your ideas together. And I think that's a great thing that CAL-ALHFA can offer its members and our colleagues. So if you've got an idea, you want to put it together, we can help you do that. And we can certainly promote it to our pretty big band of mailing list participants. So looking forward to seeing you at our webinars, definitely looking forward to seeing you at our annual meeting next year. Wendy?
Great. Thank you, Mary Ellen. Up next is our state program. And we like to invite our state representatives back each year. They're very gracious to attend and give us the latest on each of the 4 main housing agencies in the state for affordable housing. So I'd like to start with Housing and Community Development. Jennifer Seeger. She is the Deputy Director of Financial Assistance for State Programs. Jennifer, hello, Jennifer. Jennifer has over 2 decades of experience at HCD and formerly served as Deputy Director of Policy. It always sounds like a very long time when you say it that way, doesn't it? But what that tells us is you have covered both policy and programs and are very knowledgeable. And we'd love to hear from you about what last year's accomplishments look like and where do you think HCD and the state programs are headed in 2022. Jennifer?
Sounds great. I'm going to try and do a quick screen share if that's all right.
Great.
If you could give me a quick thumbs up.
I will let you know when I see it. There it is.
How's that look? All right. So I just wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of talking about what's new at HCD. Before I really dive into the content though, I wanted to kind of alert folks to some of the recent changes that we've made kind of just in the structure of how programs are administered at HCD, because I think that's going to be important for folks to understand. You know, and this is really because of the significant growth that we've had in the last 1.5 years or so and continue to have, both in size and responsibility. You know, previously we had primarily just one division that was engaged in program funding implementation. We now have 3 divisions engaged in those types of activities. We have the Division of State Financial Assistance, and that's focused in on the state-funded loan and grant programs. It's approximately 15 different programs that we administer there. We have the Federal Financial Assistance Program, and those are the programs that are for state-administered CDBG, ESG, and home to non-entitlement jurisdictions, as well as CARES Act funding. Our most recent Emergency Rental Assistance Program, the ERAP program, and also CDBG-DR. for disaster recovery in disaster impacted communities statewide. And then we also have our housing policy division that has had more and more activity or surrounding grants for planning type activities. Today, I'm really going to focus in on the state administered programs, but if folks have questions about some of the other activities in those other divisions, I can also kind of field those questions when we have the open dialogue at the tail end. So looking back before we jump forward, wanted to look at what we have accomplished since 2018. And I picked 2018 because that's really when we got the most significant large infusion of resources with the passage of Proposition 1, Proposition 2, and then also the passage of SB 2. So since 2018, we've awarded more than $4 billion in program funding. That's resulted in the creation or preservation of more than 38,000 units statewide. We also continue to do the long-term monitoring of a portfolio of approximately 1,200 affordable housing developments that make up more than 600,000 rental and ownership units throughout the state. So if you look at since 2018, we had awarded more than $4 billion in funding. Now, if you look at that last bullet, we've got more than $5 billion in funding, which we anticipate making available in the next fiscal year. So that just shows the tremendous growth in the amount of resources that we've had in this year's budget. Those $5 billion are estimated to result in approximately 64,000 units. So the first question we get asked a lot is how much money is left, right? In some of these programs from Prop 1 and Prop 2. So this slide is just to kind of give you a quick snapshot of where we are on those bond financed multifamily funding programs. So you can see the very top one, MHP. There was $1.4 billion authorized in Prop 1 for that program. We've awarded $783 million. We have a current NOFA that just recently closed. That was for $220 million, which leaves us about $394 million available under that program. For VIP, it was $600 million with about $129 million remaining available. IIG, we've got about $124 million available, although there were some additional resources for IIG in this year's budget for $250 million of general fund dollars. We also have CERNA, which has about $96 million. You'll see that Todd and No Place Like Home are both coming to the end of their funding rounds. For Todd, we have awarded all funds made available under Proposition 1. For No Place Like Home, the current NOFA that was just released will be the final NOFA under No Place Like Home under the current structure. AHSC is a little bit of a different beast, right? That has ongoing NOFAs subject to the cap and trade auction revenues. We have a current NOFA that is under review and anticipate making awards in January of 2022 for about $785 million on that program. So kind of looking at what are the upcoming funding opportunities. So open NOFAs, CAL-HOME, also funded under Prop 1, but wasn't reflected under the previous slide because it isn't a multifamily housing program. We have a open NOFA that closes kind of late November. And the CAL-HOME program provides funding for first-time home buyer, mortgage assistance, owner-occupied rehab, accessory dwelling units or junior accessory dwelling units or homeownership development project loans. So a lot of variety there in terms of the eligible activities. PLHA, that's the permanent local housing allocation. That is the ongoing formula allocation of the SB2 $75 recording fee on real estate transactions. So that is open for an over-the-counter period through the end of the calendar year. Once that closes, we'll do the math on the revenue from that program and then issue another NOFA in January or February of next year, issuing the allocations for all eligible jurisdictions from the prior year real estate transaction fee collection data. CERNA, that NOFA is closed and it's pending awards in November. We have a pretty busy month in November, making awards under CERNA, IIG, Local Housing Trust Fund, and the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention Program. And then, as I mentioned previously, the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program, about $728 million there, awards coming in January. So what's upcoming? We have our No Place Like Home, which was just released, the final No Place Like Home, notice of funding availability, PLHA, that's the upcoming revenues from the real estate transaction fees for 2021 that will be made available in 2022. And then finally, our multifamily super NOFA, which we estimate will be about $400 million and will be released probably in February of 2022. So I did want to kind of, in addition to just the snapshot of the NOFAs, dig in a little bit deeper on 3 priorities for 2021, 2022. And those are the AB 434 Super NOFA, which many of you have probably heard of and have been engaged in some of our conversations and stakeholder outreach sessions. Then secondly, building off of Home Key successes, Home Key 2.0 was funded through the approval of this year's budget. We've got just about $1.5 billion in funding available in this calendar year. And then also accelerating housing production. So that is our housing accelerator program to kind of reduce the backlog of HCD funded projects that are just pending awards at either CIDLAC or TCAT. So I'm going to dive into these just a little bit individually so you can get a sense of where we are on these different priorities. So the first, the AB 434, 3 primary goals. The first is alignment with CIDLAC and TCAC requirements, consistency, which means having common thresholds and rating ranking criteria across our programs. For those of you that have utilized our programs in the past, you know that each program has its own individualized set of guidelines, each with varying priorities, threshold requirements. We're trying to, the greatest extent possible, make those consistent across our programs. And then also timing, having a one-stop shop internally here at HCD for multifamily funding opportunities. So AB 434 requires that we issue a notice of funding availability for the multifamily programs listed here at the same time that we release a NOFA under the MHP program. So the programs included are the MHP program, the Veterans Housing and Homelessness Prevention Program, the CERNA Farm Worker Program, and the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program. You'll see there that the Transit-Oriented Development and Housing for Healthy California programs are crossed out. Those are crossed out. They are included in the bill, but there is no longer any funding for those programs. So that's why they're listed the way they are. So upcoming public comment opportunities. In early December, we'll be releasing draft guidelines for CERNA, IIG, and the Veterans Housing Program, along with revised MHP draft guidelines. That's where I think you'll really start to see the program take shape. You'll see those common thresholds, the baseline kind of rating and ranking criteria, which is going to be really in effect the MHP rating and ranking criteria, with some minor modifications to address policy priorities in the other programs. And then we'll also be releasing the draft rating and ranking methodology. So the process of how we will rate and rank individual projects and how funding will be allocated. So please stay tuned for upcoming webinars, stakeholder feedback sessions on those guidelines. It will be kind of early December after Thanksgiving, right in between Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we know that's a hard time to kind of do public comment, but we want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to weigh in on those as we look to finalize those guidelines for a NOFA release in February or March of 2022. So secondly, I just wanted to focus a little bit on HomeKey. You can see here on the left-hand side of the screen, kind of HomeKey 1.0 and some of the results and outcomes of that effort. We had approximately $800 million available. We converted just over 6,000 doors and created just over 5,900 usable units. We had awards in 51 jurisdictions, 120 unique project sites. And then one of the most critical things, and one of the things I think we're most proud of, is that we were able to do that for approximately $129,000 per unit. So when you look at the costs of creating affordable units, this was done at a very low cost comparatively to some of our other programs. So HomeKey 2.0, when I talked about the $5 billion made available in this year's budget, 2.75 billion of that was for HomeKey. We have released our first NOFA. It was released on September 9th. It is for a total of 1.4 billion. There will be a second NOFA released late fall of 2022 for the remainder of those funds. Awards are really made on a first come, first served basis. As of today, we have received 8 applications requesting just over $228 million. There is a requirement that interested applicants must participate in a pre-application consultation. So our team is really busy with those consultations. If you are interested in those funds, making an appointment for that pre-app consultation is definitely the first step. Wanted to highlight a couple things that are new for HomeKey 2.0. The first is that there are now tribal and foster youth set-asides, 5% for tribal and 8% for foster youth. We've increased the per door award amount. It ranges between $150,000 and $200,000 per door based on the unit size. The capital money here must be spent within 8 months of award. So this is due to some of the timing restrictions with the federal funding source that we're utilizing for this program. There are also bonus funds for expedited applications and expedited occupancy. So if you have a project that you can turn over very, very quickly, there are bonus funds for those types of projects. And then also scoring incentives for permanent housing. So the final thing I wanted to touch on is the California Housing Accelerator. So here the goals have really been to clear a backlog of pending developments awaiting for their bond allocations and 4% tax credits. We have about 100 projects that are sitting waiting for their 4% tax credits. They are funded by HCD. They have been funded by HCD in some cases for many years, but have just been unsuccessful, particularly now given the competitive nature of the bond allocation. We want to be able to maximize the investments that are made into HCD funding projects, reduce the amount of time and money spent on producing affordable housing. Everyone knows the longer that these projects take to develop, the more they cost, the increases in construction costs, holding costs of the land. And then also we really want to accelerate the development of housing for those most in need. So we have about 1.75 billion available under this program for this calendar year. We are operating the program under two different tiers of prioritization. Tier 1 has a current project solicitation out. It is a defined group of about 34 projects that are known to have previously applied for CIDLAC on or before 7/1 of 2021, but were unsuccessful in securing bonds. Tier 1 applications are due by, I believe we extended that date. It's November 3rd now, not October 29th. And then we anticipate having those awards completed in mid-November. So this is a very quick process. We have already reviewed those projects. We have already awarded funds to those projects. From our perspective, there is no need to do a complete underwriting of those projects. We are looking for changes made to the project since we awarded our funds, and then any changes to the project costs. Tier 2 prioritization is really pending the outcomes of Tier 1. We expect a solicitation to be released probably late November. It will also be a not necessarily a defined group, but there will be priorities in terms of who we're looking to fund. It will be a competitive process, most likely, because we will not have enough money to fund all of our pipeline projects. But prioritization will probably consider some level of affordability, geographic equity, and potentially also the age of the HCD funds that were awarded. You can see a couple bullet here for the requirements. You have to have at least one capital award on the project on or after 2018. You have to be able to commence construction with 180 days of award. This is probably the most critical factor, right? We want these projects. We're moving very, very quickly on these funds. We want the projects to be able to move forward just as quickly. And that is a statutory requirement. So you do need to be able to demonstrate that you can commence construction, literally meaning having some sort of shovel in the ground within 180 days of award. We're basically swapping out the requested tax equity with a forgivable zero interest loan, but we are requiring a $40,000 refundable application fee. Again, this is just to encourage those projects that are most shovel ready. We want folks to come to us when they can meet that 180-day turnaround time. So that's kind of it. I didn't want to dig in too much on the specifics of the program. Happy to answer any questions that might come up, but if you have any more information, we have websites for all of these things that I've discussed: AB 434, Home Key, and the Accelerator Program. Also, our NOFA calendar is posted on our website and is updated on a quarterly basis. That's it for me.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Let's see, I think my video will pop up here in a second. That was a lot of information.
Yes.
Yes, and I see Rochelle has been monitoring our questions, and I think she may have a couple for you.
I do.
Yes, please.
I
go
do.
ahead.
We had a couple of comments from Rick Barnes in Glendale, and they have to do with conversions and conversion requirements. In particularly, he asks, are there more of the conversions without conversion requirements?
I guess I'm not entirely sure.
And let me make sure, because I looked at the time on that. Rick, if you are on, why don't we open up your microphone so you can clarify the question in the way that you wanted it to be asked.
Okay, am I on?
Mm-hmm.
Hi.
Yeah.
I've been I have deal with a lot of apartments, and what I've seen is I actually bought a building that was built in 1952, and there was a tenant in there that had been there from 1959 until her death about 10 years ago. But what I saw was that I have a lot of tenants that are staying in their buildings. And I was looking at the fact that trying to get people to understand home ownership would be great if we could do some conversion without having to do sound walls, all these other things that are demanded of us. So I was looking at how can we do that, create a homeowner association with them. And what it also does is it gives the sellers the initiative to convert them and do long-term capital gains on their individual units as they sell them. Instead of having the 1031s and all that, they have the property tax already in place. We can sell them at a lower price to the individuals, those kind of things. I mean, I just thought, and then they sell it, they're going to make a profit, even though it's still like an own your own that does not get the same value as a full condominium. But we're seeing a lot of ticks taking place here in Los Angeles. And it's like, why not do it where we're able to make conversions, maybe plumbing, electrical, stuff like that, if they don't have 1 meter, I mean, if they go from 1 meter. But I mean, I see something that we could do reasonably inexpensive and at the same time benefit a lot of people that are already paying rent. And with the changes, they get tax write-offs, they get different things like that. And our city just looks at me like I'm a nut, but I keep saying, no, it is a way to help people get into housing and take more responsibility in their own buildings.
All right, thanks a lot, Rick. Jennifer, is this a question that you can answer with HCD?
Not really. I mean, I think there's a lot of things wrapped up in that question. Also, some code enforcement, or not like codes and standards type issues as well in terms of the conversion of properties from rental to ownership. I think it's an interesting point, and I appreciate him raising the issue. But at this point, I don't know that there's much to kind of that I can respond to. But just to kind of appreciate him raising the issue.
Rick, that might be something that we can take a look at on the CAL-ALHFA board and see if we can move that forward. So stay tuned. If you're not a dues paying member of CAL-ALHFA yet, we put a link.
Looks like
in the
I
chat.
Should be now.
It's
been very interesting
to have you
to
join the
see.
conversation.
Yes.
It might be something that we're looking at future webinar and session topics.
Mhm.
This might be a great one for us to start thinking outside of the box. So thanks for that question. We've got a question from Michelle Ota. Does your department decide on distributing the funds for MCC tax credit program? If so, will there be any funds allocated next year, since 20 and 21 were not funded for this program in the state of California?
I will defer to others on that question. That is not us.
All right. There's a question from Jennifer La Liberté, and it is, will there be a home program NOFA, or has it been superseded by the Super NOFA?
No, there will definitely continue to be a home program NOFA. So the home program is run out of our Division of Federal Financial Assistance. So I didn't include that in my slides, but if you go to our NOFA calendar online, it does include the timing of those federally funded programs as well.
Okay. All right. Now, I'd love to ask you, you mentioned that there's going to be a priority, and I understand the need for that for the deeply affordable. But for those of us who are working at the community level, and we're getting a lot of pushback from community members who are saying that we are leaving a large swath of residents out. For example, most of the community, I'm going to talk about a project we're doing in South Los Angeles, and our housing is getting homeless and chronically homeless dollars. But the community asked if we could find a way to make housing available for those at 61% up to 80. And in some of the communities, people will ask us for that moderate income from 61% up to 120. The funding sources don't support that. It's not competitive at that level. But what the communities are pushing back is that we are doing a couple of things. We are concentrating poverty. The other thing is we are exacerbating racial segregation by doing that. And then the final thing is that they feel that by doing that, we are disincentivizing reinvestment in that community. And I say reinvestment and not gentrification. How do we, what programs are there out there so that we can, by adding some upper income units, we are not taking ourselves out of competitiveness? Is HCD looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to look at it from a couple different perspectives. When you look at, I'm going to take the extremely low income and the affordability targeting first, but when you look at what the state has produced and where the greatest need is in terms of new units and units that have been underproduced historically, it is at that ELI level. That is why we target our programs to the extremely low income level. Now, you can go up to like 60% in MHP. We're looking at different ways that we can incorporate our tiebreakers to look at a range of needs, but it is going to continue to be focused on extremely low income, right? Because that is where the greatest need is. In terms of investing in communities and concentration of poverty, we have taken a really strong look at and incorporated into our programs, and will continue to do so even more than we have previously through AB 434 at affirmatively furthering fair housing. So looking at investing and putting projects in areas of opportunity. And then we're also looking at some of our other programs and things that we can do to continue to promote investment in disadvantaged communities or communities that are have a higher concentration of poverty. So it's not just putting the housing resources there, but also doing community development, infrastructure improvements, and other types of investments in those communities. So it's kind of a both and approach. But in terms of the targeting of our projects, I mean, I would anticipate that will continue to be targeted to the most deeply targeted projects.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I'm going to turn this back over to Wendy. The last comment that I will say is that I'm really pleased at how receptive and responsive HCD has been in their listening tours. And we look forward to more good work.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think that was very informative, and you covered a lot of programs in a short period of time. Our next panel that we will cover will be the California Housing Finance Agency. Tina Johnson Hall is CAL-HFA's newly appointed executive director, appointed by Governor Newsom in July of 2021. Tina's been a member of CAL-HFA's board of directors since 2014 and has served as vice president and manager of community development finance for BBVA Compass Bankshares, Inc., while on CAL-HFA's board of directors. And her board chair says Tina has already used her extensive experience and knowledge to help lead CAL-HFA through some of the most successful years in the history of the organization. And that board is very excited about CAL-HFA's future with Tina Johnson Hall at the helm. So join me in welcoming Tina. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you so much, Wendy, for inviting me. I am happy.
There you go. It looks like you're back.
So thank you very much, Wendy. I'm excited to be here and excited to introduce myself to everyone. As you mentioned, I'm newly appointed. This is just my second month on the job at CAL-ALHFA. And as you mentioned, I spent many years in banking, several years on the board. My focus has always been in community development finance. I've worked at nonprofit organizations. I've also even worked for the city of Los Angeles. And so through those relationships, I've had the honor of working with and meeting many of the members in your audience. And for those that I haven't worked with, I actually look forward to working with you all in the coming months and years. I'll just share a little bit about myself that you won't find in my resume, which is why I took this position. My background actually starts with me being housed in affordable housing in the city of Los Angeles. And that was necessitated by a comedy of circumstances or a number of circumstances. And so I am here for affordable housing, has been, because my lens on affordable housing starts with me and my own personal experiences. I'm hoping that I can bring those experiences along with what I've learned along the way and really bring a fresh eyes to what I believe CAL-ALHFA is already doing in a very specific, important, and deliberate way. And hopefully we can create some more successes in the coming years. As you know, CAL-ALHFA is a self-supported state agency that was created in 1975 to serve as the state's affordable housing lender. Our mission is to finance the housing needs of Californians, and we do that basically by utilizing two primary platforms. The first one is partnering with affordable housing developers with local governments to build and preserve affordable rental housing. And then of course, the second, through our homeownership program, is to provide first mortgages, which we pair with down payment assistance for first-time home buyers. So I'll start a little bit talking about the single family numbers that I am particularly proud of and that we've done in the past few years. In the past 3 years, CAL-ALHFA has provided more than $600 million in down payment assistance. And that assistance has helped more than 33,000 California families to access $10 billion in mortgages. Last year alone, CAL-ALHFA helped 9,000 families buy their first home. And what's really exciting about that is that 68% of those folks were people of color. You know, there are a lot of places out there talking about equity and addressing historical housing discrimination, but we are really doing it. And I'm just thrilled about that. This, and I'll just say one other thing. This isn't the first one-year fluke. We have had the same level demographic numbers holding steady for 5 years straight. However, even though our home ownership programs help people of color at a high rate, when it comes to the Black community specifically, the overall home ownership numbers still aren't good. I don't need to go into all the redlining and historical discrimination because I know this audience knows that well. And I'm sure many of you have read The Color of Law. If you haven't, get the book, it's fantastic. But when you look at the current numbers, the Black home ownership rate in California is around 60%, which is no better than it was in 1960, prior to the Fair Housing Act. Furthermore, the median wealth of white families in Los Angeles is about 100 times that of Black families because they haven't had the same opportunity to build generational wealth through home ownership. So this is why CAL-ALHFA introduced the Black Home Ownership Initiative, and that is also why we call it Building Black Wealth. The initiative itself has 3 parts. The first part is education. We built out an educational component that details how historical discrimination has gotten us to the point where we are, and also provide some nuts and bolts education around buying a home at the same time. That nuts and bolts piece is there because we found that there are many Black families out there who have never experienced home ownership, and therefore they don't know the experience to pass along that knowledge to themselves or to their future generations. The second part is connection to resources, whether that is to our own home down payment assistance or to free housing counseling that's available in other states, local municipalities, local governments. We're sharing that information as well. And then, of course, the third part is outreach to partnerships with community organizations. And we work with them to help amplify this message. So we're really trying to make an even greater impact in this space because we understand how important it is to do so. New and single family, let's jump to that. Now, I'll mention just a few things about our single family programs and some tweaks that we've made along the way, and then some about our new initiatives. So let's start with the historical context first. We have raised the cap on our down payment assistance from $10,000 to $15,000, just to kind of keep up with the market. And what hasn't changed is that teachers, firefighters, and people that are buying manufactured homes or homes with ADUs have no dollar cap. It's just a 3.5% down payment assistance of the sales price. We've also expanded programs to assist disaster victims, as well as rural borrowers. And in addition, there's about $200 million or so that is coming to CAL-ALHFA from the state budget. $100 million of that will be used to expand our existing homeownership programs to target even more borrowers at the lower end of the spectrum. And then the rest will go to expand our brand new ADU program that some of you have likely heard about recently through our press release. We have $100 million available for that. Our ADU program is designed for lower income homeowners or low equity homeowners to increase their equity and provide them with another source of income. What we're offering up is a $25,000 grant. So we really see this program as a way to help Californians stay in that home ownership path and eventually become the kind of family that can build wealth and help the next generation. And of course, another reason for a benefit of ADUs is that it also helps to increase the rental housing stock that our state is sorely lacking. About our multifamily program. Speaking of rental housing, our multifamily division has seen continued growth in the past few years. In fact, last fiscal year was our best ever as we used $1.8 billion in lending and bond issuance to support the creation and preservation of more than 5,100 affordable housing units. We're doing this through our conduit bond issuance program, as well as permanent financing through our flagship MIP program, our mixed income program. We refer to it as MIP, as you all know. And just an update on MIP, where are we at with that? Because I know that will be of special interest to some of you. I'll start with some background. From the program's creation in 2019 through the end of 2020, CAL-ALHFA has issued final funding commitments for 23 MIP projects, representing about 3,800 new units of housing. I actually went to the grand opening of the first one that has come to fruition and is now open for business recently in the Placerville community, and it was absolutely stunning. These units are restricted at a mix of low incomes and are located all around the state. So far in 2021, we have issued initial commitments to 13 more MIP projects, with 7 having already received a bond allocation and tax credits, and 6 more going in the next round. The 7 that have already received allocation represents another 1,000 units. I know we've been talking about today about finding ways to streamline and reduce and come up with ways to address the missing middle. This is a great project, program just for that. Our analysis of the first 20 projects as compared to non-MIP projects that receive funding in the same SIDLEC round shows that MIP projects cost almost $120,000 less in total development cost per unit and went from application to construction about 1 year quicker. Most of those projects got done in 15 months versus 24 months. On the average, they're also built in higher opportunity areas. For those that aren't familiar, MIP is funded through allocations from Senate Bill 2 and the 2019 state budget that are directed to be used for low and moderate income housing. This program provides subordinate financing as well as a reservation of state tax credits to new construction projects that serve a mix of income. For 2021, we had caps of $8 billion per project and $60,000 per unit. And the financing could not be combined with other state programs other than IIG and state tax credits. So what we're trying to do here is to create another source that could be used that doesn't compete with our partners over at HCD. Those elements will remain the backbone of the program, but as always, we are taking lessons learned and looking at ways that we can adapt in 2022. And so we plan to release the term sheet soon. We're looking at January prospectively, and then we will begin to accept applications over the counter until we have enough eligible requests to cover the $65 million that we expect to make available. Some of the areas that we are looking into updating include the efficiency measure and the affordability requirement. So shifting gears, I want to talk to you about the bond recycling program. I know some of you were here last year and heard about from our director of legislation, Frances Marquis, where he talked in detail about CAL-ALHFA's bond recycling program. For this innovative program, we are partnering with Apple, who is providing the credit facility to warehouse the bonds during the recycling process. This will allow us to reuse low-cost, tax-exempt financing for additional projects, giving the state another financing tool to build more affordable housing. And crucially, this tool outside of our already oversubscribed volume cap. That's how it works. And I have just a couple of updates on our bond recycling program also to share. CAL-ALHFA has recently entered into some really exciting partnerships with both San Diego and San Francisco, and that will make it easier to collaborate on deals using bond recycling. We think that these partnerships will increase the pipeline, which means more affordable housing getting preserved or created. I also wanted to touch on something that will probably come up in the legislative session that follows ours, and that is one of the affordable housing provisions that we are hoping will remain in the Building Back Better legislation being debated in Congress right now, and that is lowering the 50% test. Some of you may have actually seen the article that I co-authored with New York on this exact front. The reason I am mentioning this now is just to say that if that happens, the bond cap will be getting spread over more projects, which will allow more of them to access tax credits, which is a very good thing. It will create a financing gap, but the gap will be filled by recycled bonds. We're ready for it. Homeowner assistance, I want to talk about that. I talked about our homeownership and multifamily programs, but when I really think about it, CAL-HFA is really more of a three-legged stool. The third leg is providing what I call sustainability around homeownership, which is to provide the support to people who already own their home. This actually starts when we require home buyer education for each of our first-time home buyers. We also have a program that uses national mortgage settlement funds to provide free housing counseling through HUD certified counselors. The counseling is done on a range of topics, from the home buying process to mortgage delinquency, to help with rental housing, to homelessness or to prevent homelessness. CAL-HFA will also be administering the mortgage relief program on behalf of the state of California. And this program will use California's allocation of homeowner assistance, California's allocation of homeowner assistance funds from the American Rescue Plan Act, which will be about $1 billion. That money will be used on grants to homeowners that have experienced COVID-related hardships and fallen on hard times, fallen behind on their mortgages. CAL-HFA has put together a program plan which has been sent to the U.S. Treasury for review and approval. And after we get that approval, Treasury will send those funds to CAL-HFA, and the Mortgage Relief Program application portal will open up. We were chosen to administer these funds on behalf of the state, in large part because of our success in administering the Keep Your Home California, the mortgage assistance program, for people that got behind during the 2008 housing crisis. So that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions. Looks like we've got a lot.
Okay, I'm trying to start my video here, Tina. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We do have quite a few questions. What we're going to do, because we're running a little bit behind time, is that we will address these questions, move on to our last panelist, and then we're not going to have a break between that and the legislative panel, because we want to give them as much time as we possibly can and make sure we get everything in. So we are going to mow right through the rest of the next couple of sessions. Rochelle, I saw the chat box light up. I think you have answered a few of them, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I sent the questions over, but I'm going to read them all off to you, Tina, and you answer whichever one you feel moved to answer. So there were a few that came in, a couple of anonymous, and then a couple from one of our panelists yesterday. So I'm going to start with him, since he identified himself. Anything that you can't answer now, we will submit to you, you can answer, and we will send that out with our follow-up email on the conference. There were two questions that came from the Power Is Now media. One is, there's many DPAs that allowed 2 to 4 unit properties. Why is CAL-ALHFA limiting the DPA to single family homes, especially now with the need to increase density and inventory? The second question he wrote is, the cost of housing in California is so high that families are able to, are pulling their resources to buy and live together, but there are many that don't want to live together. Why is CAL-ALHFA not allowing non-occupant co-borrowers to help people qualify?
I'll start with the second question, because I'm not sure that I can answer that one just yet. But I'm taking it down, and I'll need to follow up and share that information. In terms of the 2 to 4, I think the answer is not yet. It's not something that we have done, but we are absolutely thinking about how we might think about that. And we understand that that is an area. What we're trying to do here is to expand opportunities so that more Californians have a place to live. And we do understand that that is a segment that we might think about looking at going forward.
Here's a question from Anonymous. Of the 68%, what is the percentage of Black Californians that receive assistance from CAL-ALHFA?
Repeat that one more time.
It said of the 68%, this was early in your question. What is the percentage of Black Californians that received assistance from CAL-ALHFA? Do you have that data right now? If you don't, there's another question that we can move to. So this,
I don't have it in front of me, but I believe it was just under 6%.
okay. And then the last question that I had was the cap for down payment assistance used to be 3.5% of the total loan amount. Why did you reduce it to 15,000?
We did not reduce it to 15,000. It is 3.5%. I will put in, I will put in the link so that we can have those specific numbers, but it's not been reduced.
Okay, those are the questions that we have. Any questions that we weren't able to get to, we will get the answers and we will send those out to you as a follow-up to the conference. Again, if you are not a conference, a CAL-ALHFA member, then you probably want to do that so that you don't miss any of the exciting information that we have to share. Wendy, I will put it over to you now.
Thank you, Rochelle. And thank you very much, Tina, for being with us today. And congratulations on your new appointment. And we look forward to seeing you in the future and talking with you again. Thank you very much. Now let's move on to our final panel, both tax credit and CDLAC allocation committees. And let me introduce Nancy Robles. Ms. Robles currently serves as the executive director for both organizations. In 2020, she served as executive director of the California Pollution Control Financing Authority that brought her full circle back to where she started her public service career. From 2014 to 2020, she's worked her way up from deputy director of compliance to acting executive director at the Infrastructure and Economic Development Bank. She's controlled underwriting of $40 billion in infrastructure and economic expansion projects, $350 million in annual impact to California, monitored over $900 million in iBank restricted and unrestricted assets, and promoted economic stimulus by creating and retaining 355,000 jobs during her tenure. Prior to her state service, she spent over 30 years in private sector banking. So please welcome Nancy. And Nancy, what news do you have for us concerning both TCAC and CDLAC? Thank you.
Hi, Wendy. Thank you so much. I do have a presentation. I'll go ahead and share my screen, and that will give an idea of the updates we have. Is my screen showing?
Not yet. Here we go.
How about now? Okay, great.
There it is.
All right. So the update for CDLAC and TCAC for 2021. First off, I don't want to presume that everyone knows what CDLAC and TCAC is. So the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee is what we call TCAC, and the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee is CDLAC. And I'll tell you a little bit about what each one of those does. So with the debt limit allocation, every year, we have a volume cap on tax exempt bonds. And what that means is the federal government gives us a calculator, and it's a certain dollar amount per person in our population of California. We calculate that and we come up with the amount of tax exempt debt that the federal government will allow California to have. So in 2021, that amount was about 4.3 billion, a little bit over 4.3 billion. And all but 600 million of that went to multifamily affordable housing in California. Now, there are about 13 different categories of tax exempt debt, and it includes housing. It also includes industrial development, multifamily housing, single family housing. It includes school loans, recycling, and solid waste like trash pickup. So our focus in 2021, as it was in 2020, was multifamily housing. On the tax credit side, we have several different types of tax credits. So we have a 9% low income housing tax credit, which is a LIHTC, what we call LIHTC. And this is a subsidy that's used to help finance construction and rehabilitation for low income affordable rental housing. And this is primarily what our focus was at TCAC and CIDLAC this year. We also had some funding for 9% disaster credits, and disaster credits is a credit for affordable housing that was affected by a disaster like our wildfires or our floods. We have a 4% credit that is paired with the tax exempt bonds. Now, you heard Tina a few minutes ago talk about the 50% test, and that is what relates to the 4% credit and the tax exempt bond. There's a requirement that in order to get the 4% tax credit, the project also must have a tax exempt bond that is 50% of its eligible basis of the project. Now, we're looking at legislation. We've been following it very carefully over the last few days. It's proposed to reduce that to 25%. If we can reduce it from 50% to 25%, we'll free up a lot of scarce resources that we have right now, and we'll be able to fund more housing projects. That was in peril over the weekend. But it looks like it's back on the table, and it's part of the bill that the White House is looking at right now. So when we make decisions about how we allocate our tax credits and our bond allocation, we look at our state goals. And our state goals right now are increasing housing units, reducing the cost of development, and then maximizing the scarce resources that I just spoke of. So as an update, in our 4% application round, so far in 2021, we had about 354 applications and 106 awards. So you can see that, there are, like 3 times as many applications that come in as we can actually award these funds to. On the construction side, about 88% of what we're funding for right now is new construction, and about 11% is rehabilitation. So rehabilitation is, just what it sounds like. It's rehabilitating existing affordable housing that needs upgrading. So that, so for our new construction units, that equals about, almost 9,000 units. And rehabilitation, about 1,300 for a total of a little over 10,000 units so far. In the 9%, we've had 2 rounds of 9% tax credits. In the first round, 60, in the second round, 122. So 182 applications. We were able to fund 59 of those awards. Disaster credits, we had 80 million in disaster credits to allocate. We had 65 applications and awarded 37 of those. On the bond allocation side, like I said earlier, there was about 4.3 billion in bond allocation. 3.7 went to affordable housing. And 600 million went to exempt facilities, and that would be the solid waste and recycling that I spoke of earlier. However, in the middle of the year, we did take 200 million of the exempt facility and moved it over to housing. So we had 3.9 billion in affordable housing allocation. And out of those applications, we received 343 applications. We've completed round 1 and 2, so 47 projects in round 1, 59 in round 2. And in round 3 that's still pending, we anticipate that might be around 56 projects. So this has been a very competitive year. Last year was competitive, this year's competitive. And you know, we don't have enough resources to go around. We wish we could fund everyone that's out there. Affordable housing is a priority at the Treasurer's office. And this is how we distributed the fund last year. Homelessness and extremely low income, very low income housing projects were our priority. So the majority of the allocation went into that pool. We also created a BIPOC allocation this year, and that's Black, Indigenous, people of color, and this was for emerging developers. So emerging developers that fell into that category got their own allocation, and this is to help assist those developers you know, come into the mainstream of development, partner with experienced developers, and give them an equal opportunity within this realm. We also had the mixed income pool that you also heard Tina talk about. There is an allocation for that. As you can see on here, I won't read these figures off to you, but those are the amounts that were allocated to each and the amount of funding remaining in those particular categories. We anticipate allocating every single one of those dollars by the end of the year. A lot of people have been asking about regulations. Regulations has been a hot topic here. When we've changed the regulations in order to allocate these funds in the most equitable way that we can throughout the last year. Going forward, we do have a mandate that we amend our tiebreaker in our formula so that we can measure state investment against the public benefit of those projects. So we do propose changing our regulations in November. We will come out with a proposal. We'll engage stakeholder feedback, and stakeholder feedback is actually how we make decisions here. We have a committee at CDLAC and TCAC that hear recommendations from not only from staff, but from stakeholders, and then they make decisions on how this fund is allocated. We plan to adopt regulations either at our last meeting of the year or possibly into January, but certainly before the first allocation goes out in 2020. So I have some contact information of my superstar staff here. Anthony Zito is my director, deputy director at TCAC. Emily Burgos, the senior program manager at CDLAC. That's their information. And then looking forward, we're just really hopeful that the 50% test can be reduced to 25. The treasurer has been working diligently to support that legislation, has been sending off text messages all weekend and early this week in hopes of that passing. Also, the one-stop shop that Tina and Jennifer spoke of, which HCD, CAL-ALHFA, CDLAC, and TCAC are working together to try to unify all of our programs and make it an easier process for everyone. And with that, I'll go ahead and stop and answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for your presentation and update on all of those programs. Yes, we will be in there advocating for the reduction of the 50% test down to 25. It would help with resources. I am checking the chat box here to see if we've had some new questions come in. I don't know.
There are a couple of questions.
Okay, great. You
Yeah.
want to repeat those for us, Rochelle?
Sure. Michelle Oda asked, let me move this so that I'm not looking in a different direction. Michelle Oda asked, and then she followed up and said, this may be a question for SIDLAC, but does your program decide on distributing the funds for the tax credit program? And if the MCC tax credit program, and if so, will there be any funds allocated this next year, since 20 and 21 were not funded for the program in California?
Right, so SIDLAC is the entity that would grant allocation for MCC. And you're correct, there was no allocation available last year or this year. It's undecided at this point whether it will be for the year coming. However, our focus again is multifamily affordable housing. This is the the state goals is to take care of our homelessness and our low income affordable housing. The committee makes the decisions on the allocations, usually at our first meeting in January of 2022, but conversations go on between now and then at our committee meetings.
And that was the only question.
Okay.
So you can go on to the next session.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great, then that will close out our state program panels. Thank you so much for joining us today and updating us on those state programs. Without any further delay, I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ellen to introduce our legislative update panel. I'm sorry we're running a little bit behind, but I think we're going to get it all in today. Mary Ellen?
Thanks very much. I have chatted with our final panelists and they are available to stay a little late. Thank you all very much. And because we are running late, I'm going to dispense with the formal introductions of our panelists and turn it over to Marina Wyant, who is the Vice President of Legislative Affairs for the California Housing Consortium and a great friend and colleague and somebody with whom I've worked for many years. Marina, thanks so much for being here. After Marina does her broad overview of what is expected in 2022, Lisa Engel and Allison Hughes will talk about their committees and what they're going to be doing with regard to housing legislation upcoming. And then we will conclude our panel with Louis Ferrante, who is the legislative advocate for California YIMBY. So Marina, take it away.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Real pleasure to be here again. I think I missed last year's, but happy to join. The California Housing Consortium is an affordable housing advocacy organization. We're focused primarily on the production and preservation of low and moderate income housing. And I just wanted to talk a little bit today about kind of where we are. When we started in 2021, I think we had the COVID-19 was still raging on, and we were unsure of kind of what the budget situation with the state was going to be. And then a lot of uncertainty with sort of some of the land use priorities that we've been focusing on. In 2020, there were a lot of bills that kind of got held up in the legislature due to the opposition from the State Building and Construction Trades Union. The affordable housing community is really trying to seek middle ground with the trades and kind of resolve some of these issues so that bills that impact the unions and also impact production can move forward. But we were unsuccessful in kind of finding that middle ground this year. And as a result, a lot of bills just didn't end up moving. And so we saw I know Allison and Louis will probably touch on later some of the successes from the Senate around zoning, but outside of those bills, it was really difficult to move a lot of land use bills forward this year. But we did have a really exciting year. Otherwise, there was a lot of money in the budget, despite sort of some of the negative outlooks at the beginning of the year and at the beginning of sort of the COVID crisis in 2020. The state ended up seeing a lot of a lot of revenue and a lot of dollars coming from the federal government aimed at helping lower income households. And so to that point, Lisa will talk a little bit later about some of the homeless budget allocations, but we had on the affordable housing production side, a significant amount of budget dollars dedicated to a new program at the state, the California Housing Accelerator Program. Nancy spoke a moment ago about the oversubscription in CIDLAC. And the goal of the Housing Accelerator Program is to sort of supplant some of the CIDLAC and TCAC equity that would go into affordable housing projects with additional state dollars. And so the goal is to move a lot of these state, and maybe Jennifer talked about this earlier too, but to really move out a lot of the state funded program projects out of the CIDLAC queue and get production up and running quickly. And so we saw $1.75 billion allocated to this program. CHC was a big advocate and supporter of it, and really hoping to see, again, another big allocation to this program and to MHP in the 2022 budget. When some of the other bills that we worked on this year, we were sponsors of AB 115. This was a bill by Assemblymember Bloom that would allow affordable or mixed income development in commercial zones. That bill ended up not moving forward due to some of the opposition from the building trades. And then we worked a lot and were successful in passing AB 215. This was a bill to sort of expand the state's authority to enforce state housing laws, both with allowing the AG to have sort of even more authority in that realm. Those were sort of our biggest priorities this year. We've been spending a lot of time with TCAC and CIDLAC, working on sort of how does the state prioritize projects within that system. And for next year, we're really we think next year can be a really great year, both on the budget side, but hopefully to resolve a lot of the challenges we're dealing with around land use. We just spent last week with our members exploring a variety of policy issues that impact affordable production. We'd really like to see the state help local governments implement their housing element plans, so that you guys spent, some of the local governments that are on this call have spent a lot of time and energy on those plans, and we want to help ensure that they get implemented as quickly and as effectively as possible, so that the developers can jump in and make real progress and help those local governments reach their goals. And then we're also going to keep working on sort of ways to make the housing finance systems more efficient, and creating more sort of consistency between all the programs to make it easier to build affordable housing in the state. I'm going to stop there and pass it over to Allison to kind of talk a little bit more in depth about some of the bills that the Senate worked on this year. Hi, Allison.
Hi, good to see you. I'm Allison Hughes. I'm the Chief Consultant with the Senate Housing Committee. And I thought I'd talk a little bit about the Senate Housing Production Package. As many of you may know, back in 2020, the Pro Tem created a Senate Housing Working Group. And this was primarily after the failure of the passage of my boss's big density bonus bill, SB 50. The Senate felt that it was really critical that we start, really working on housing production and finding ways to incentivize the construction of more housing across the state. And so a group of key senators came up with a production package of bills in 2020. And as Marina alluded, there were some hangups last year, both COVID related, just procedurally, some political snafus. So some of those bills were not successful in reaching the governor's desk. And so several of those bills were reintroduced and included in the 2021 Senate Housing Production Package. Most notably, I'm sure most of you have heard about SB 9 by Senator Atkins. It essentially tries to, or it creates a streamlined approval process for single family homeowners to convert their homes into a duplex, or also do a ministerial lot split. The bill was amended this year to clarify that the bill was to result in no more than 4 units, just based on feedback from community groups and just generally just trying to clarify the author's intention. And that bill was signed by the governor. The other most notable bill was SB 10 by my chair, Senator Wiener, which basically creates a CEQA exemption for local governments that are rezoning areas to allow for up to 10 units that are in specified areas, most notably near transit or in existing infill areas. That bill was also signed by the governor. And the other sort of key piece of legislation in this package was SB 8 by Senator Skinner, which extended the provisions of the Housing Crisis Act. Some of you may know about it as SB 330. That was a piece of legislation that was enacted in 2019. And the key provisions of SB 330, this bill that was passed a couple of years ago, was it did really 3 sort of key things. It enacted anti-displacement protections, very robust protections for lower income multifamily renters. It provided more certainty for developers when they were applying when they were submitting their housing applications to local governments. And it also prohibited certain local actions that would have reduced housing capacity, such as downzoning, and it voided certain local policies that limited growth. And what the bill this year in the housing production package did, SB 8, was that it extended that act from 2025 to 2030. Which is the most notable change in that bill. Another bill in the housing production package was the pro tems bill SB 7, which created an expedited review of certain CEQA challenges on larger multifamily housing projects. There were a couple of other bills in the housing package that were unsuccessful. The first bill that I want to point out was SB 6 by Senator Caballero. It's substantially similar to the bill that Marina mentioned, AB 115 by Assemblymember Bloom, and that it was trying to make it easier to develop housing in traditionally commercial areas. So it would have authorized residential uses in commercial zones that allow both commercial office space and retail space rather. But the projects had to be a certain density and they had to abide by local planning and development ordinances. As Marina alluded to, there are still ongoing discussions with the labor community. And because of concerns from them and the desire to include skilled and trained workforce language, that bill was held in the assembly side. So, if there is a deal next year, there's a potential for that to move next year. The other bill that, most notable bill in the 2021 package that did not move was SB 5, which was a $6.5 billion housing bond with the goal of investing in existing affordable housing renter and homeownership programs. This is not unusual for bond measures to not move in the first year of a 2-year legislative session. It is pretty usual. It's sort of standard practice for these bills to be introduced in the first year and for them to be negotiated in the second year. I think it's also likely that because we had such a big budget surplus that it made more sense to invest the money, the general fund dollars that we had available. So I'm sure some of you are wondering what's going to happen next year with this bill. I don't know yet. There's the potential for it to move though and to be on the 2022 ballot. And just to sort of run through, there were a couple of other notable bills in the Senate housing package that were successful. My boss's other bill, SB 478, which prohibited local governments from imposing certain floor area ratio standards on housing projects between 3 and 10 units. And Senator Cortese had a bill that created a technical assistance unit for local governments to help them develop affordable housing on surplus land. sorry, I'm just going to touch a little bit. I think the questions you guys are all probably wanting to know is what's on the horizon for next year in the Senate. We're in our recess period between the first year and the second year. So we're at the point where members are developing their housing proposals for next year. As Marina talked about, I think the labor discussion is going to be ongoing. And so if there is an agreement that is able to be reached between the developer community and labor, I think we may be able to see more land use bills, streamlining bills. For example, my boss had a bill last year, SB 899, that would authorize affordable housing on church land, for example. So that's something to keep an eye out. We're also seeing quite a few housing voter initiatives that are being proposed to the Attorney General's office, and so we'll be keeping a close eye on those. And we have a couple of 2-year bills, most notably SCA 1 that I have not talked, or sorry, SCA 2 that I haven't spoken about. That's the Article 34 repeal. I at this time don't know what the status of that is, but again, because it's a ballot, it's intended to go on the 2022 ballot. I would imagine that it would be moving next year. And then I think we're continuing to monitor legislation around the conversation about building in wildfire areas. There's an ongoing discussion between local governments and the housing community about, we need to solve the housing crisis, but we also need to think critically about where are we incentivizing housing development. And so that's an ongoing conversation that we'll be monitoring in the Senate. And with that, I will turn it over to Lisa.
Hi, everybody. Lisa Engel, the Chief Consultant to Assembly and Housing Committee.
You're on mute, Lisa, sorry.
Am I muted? Should I start over? This is Lisa Engel, Chief Consultant to Assembly Housing Committee. So just start out by saying it's exciting to be here again, and having attended this conference for a number of years and talking to you guys for the past couple of years. I know all of you have worked in this field for a long time, so it's interesting sort of the changes that we've seen and sort of some of the unprecedented things we're seeing happening now. And I think, I'm going to talk a little bit about investments in homelessness this year, and then also some of the things we're thinking about for next year. So when we started out last year, we were anticipating a very tough year in terms of the budget, but as we all know, we were able to invest significantly in affordable housing and homelessness. And in fact, we were able to invest $12 billion this year in homelessness, which includes $5.8 billion for HomeKey. 2.75 billion is going to HCD to continue the work that they've been doing. And another 3 billion will be administered by Human Services to try and prop up some of the board and care facilities we have throughout the state that have been converting to or sold to market rate housing. So that is a pretty significant investment. We were also able to secure ongoing funding for the next 2 years for the homelessness housing and assistance program, which is funding that goes to local continuums of care, big cities and counties to help fund investments in increasing the supply of housing for people experiencing homelessness, rental assistance. It has very broad uses. And so when we started out the year last year, both the Assembly and Senate were pretty aligned in our desire to get more funding for this program. And we were really pushing for ongoing funding because we were hearing from local governments and others that in order to really make a significant dent in our homelessness crisis, we need that ongoing funding. So although we weren't able to get a set aside, which would be ideal in the budget ongoing, where we were able to work together with the administration to get multi-year funding and $2 billion, which is, a significant amount of money and more than we've invested in the past in any previous year. So another sort of big priority for the Assembly, and I think also for the Senate, was trying to create more accountability around how we're investing in homelessness. And that's really
both at the state and the local level. So we built into the HAP program this year a requirement that local governments, COCs, counties, any applicant create a homeless action plan. So that'll give us a better sense of kind of what the long-term plan is and what we're investing in, with a real focus on evidence-based approaches. We also created a bonus pot of funds. So if local jurisdictions or applicants are meeting their performance goals, then they can get access to more funding. So I think for us, we really need to focus in the coming years or next year really on what those action plans look like and what we're seeing local governments invest in. And then, you know, we also need to, or at least for the Assembly, our focus has been on how can the state have a more comprehensive approach to homelessness. So we also, the governors or the Homeless Coordinating Council is also going to create a statewide inventory of programs at the state level that invest in homelessness. So we can really understand sort of what are the different pots of money, who are they serving, and how can we better leverage them. And so, you know, going into next year, one of the pieces that my chair has worked on and tried to work on last year was really about how do we create better programs around reentry. So we know that a lot of people who fall into homeless are leaving institutions, and particularly jails and prisons. And so he worked last year on a bill to try and redirect some funding from prison enclosures into reentry housing programs. And so I think this is an area where we really like to dig in a little bit more and understand what are the investments that are being made into reentry housing, and what can we do on a policy level to try and slow the flow of homelessness from jails and prisons into housing. And then just I'll talk a little bit about what we're thinking about for next year. We are going to be getting a new chair, sadly, although exciting for him. Our chair, Assemblymember David Chu, has been appointed a city attorney in San Francisco. So he will be officially appointed next week. And so we will be looking at getting a new chair. It's really unclear the timing on that. It could happen quickly. It could take some time. So, but definitely, I hope we will know in the coming months. The Assembly has also this fall been engaged in some roundtables. So we have a group of members that are particularly interested in looking at what we've done around housing, land use, you know, what our investments are producing, and how we can think about what to do next. And so we have a handful of legislators that have hosted roundtables around the state, sort of geographically sprinkled around the state, the Central Coast, Fresno, San Bernardino, San Diego, Los Angeles, Orange County, Concord, and Oakland. And then there's one planned for in the coming weeks in Chico. So the point of these events is really to invite different stakeholders in to give some feedback to the members. And we've had a lot of members attending. So we've had a real core group of members that have gone to almost all of these events. And the point is to really hear what's happening across the state. You know, are we hearing similar concerns? Are we hearing, you know, what are the policy issues that we need to think about the next year? And so just at the very high level, I think some themes that we're hearing is just a desire to have some ongoing streamlining of funding sources. So we know HCD is working towards trying to streamline their programs internally, but are there other opportunities to try and streamline our multiple pots of fundings across different agencies? There's definitely a lot of focus on RENA and what impact that's having at the local level. How are we seeing more sites zoned for housing? What are going to be the outcomes from that? There's a lot of discussion around home ownership, which I know you guys had several panels on yesterday. What can we do to increase really affordable home ownership for folks who have not historically had access to home ownership? And let's see what else. Another ongoing theme we're hearing is the lack of funding for services associated with permanent housing. and the need for ongoing operating costs. So those are some sort of themes that are bubbling up. I'm not sure how we will, what we will see come out of that. I think a lot of what we'd like to see is like a focus on what we've already done. How can we make sure that what we've done on RHNA reform and trying to increase those sites for housing comes to fruition? And then what are the ways that we need to sort of improve on what we've already done? So let's see, I think that's about it. And I am going to now introduce Louis Morante with California YIMBY.
Oh, can you see me? There we go. Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Mary Ellen, for having us on today for this conversation, and thanks for having me. I'm here. My name is Louis Morante. I'm the legislative director for California YIMBY. I'm here to go over what I see in my crystal ball for the legislature next year. I think Allison, Marina, and Lisa all did a wonderful job positioning us in the sort of timeline the legislature has been working on. And oh, I sound like I'm underwater. Is that better? Can you hear me better now? Let me just see if I can switch to my computer microphone. Sorry for the tech. Hopefully that helps a little bit. I think Marina, Allison, and Lisa did a really good job positioning us in the legislature's timeline. There's been a really dramatic expansion, I think, in the focus on housing as an issue in the legislature in the last 5 years. And that reflects the really varied approaches that's reflected by the really varied approaches and the different issue areas that the Senate and the Assembly are covering, I think in a much deeper way than they have in the recent past. I did kind of want to go over just a little bit in terms of where I think we've been, because I think it helps point us to where we'll go. I think Allison did a really good job covering what the Senate's been focused on this last couple of years in terms of helping small housing types like duplexes, and in making sure that existing streamlinings stay on the books, things like SB 330. Lisa did a great job covering, Lisa and Marina did a great job covering the fact that the Assembly has been really focused, I think, on housing and homelessness. There was a really large discussion around AB 72, which was an increase in funding, a permanent source in funding for affordable housing and for homelessness activities that kind of ended up making its way into the Budget Act in terms of a 2-year use of some of the big surplus we had last year. That's definitely a conversation we'll see continue next year, as the governor's already announced large budget surpluses are coming his way. We'll know much more about how the legislature and the governor intend to use that money come January, February, but I definitely predict that we'll see a lot of it committed to housing. This governor's made housing a really big priority for him. And we saw a lot of focus, I think, on accountability this year. So the governor has created this new unit within the Department of Housing and Community Development called the Housing Accountability Unit. The HAU will help local governments with technical assistance in terms of applying for grants and understanding what the relevant laws are around housing. And in areas where local governments willfully choose not to follow the law, the Housing Accountability Unit will get involved in enforcing the law. And the HAU just announced the governor just announced the new director of the HAU, and it seems like they're really getting off the ground running, which dovetails nicely with the work that HCD is doing around housing elements right now. So I think we'll see much more in the accountability space as we understand where some of the gaps are, some of the weaknesses are, some of these programs, where some of the needs are for statutory changes. I think we'll also see a big discussion around housing affordability and affordable housing in terms of funding as that money comes in. Lisa mentioned this roundtable conversation that the Assembly has been leading on that's toured the state. Those Assembly members have heard loud and clear that folks really want to focus on home ownership. So I'm glad you had that conversation yesterday about home ownership. I think that dovetails nicely with what I think will be a very large focus for Assembly members, especially Assembly members, but the legislature in general this year, around the issue of making sure that the American dream can continue in California, that homeownership is still viable here for the middle class. That's going to be an increasing focus, I think, for legislators. As you all know, Propositions 1 and 2 are winding down. So as Allison mentioned, we'll probably see a continued conversation around reissuing bonds for affordable housing. I think that's a particularly important thing for us to be doing now. And this issue of commercial corridor zoning reform is not going away. As Marina mentioned, there's been an ongoing conversation with the State Construction Building Trades Council about where they are on housing, what are their issues in terms of what they need to be seeing in bills, because they really have had a very large effect on stopping housing production legislation, which has reached a really an untenable level, I think. And commercial zoning really, I think, offers a big promise for housing. There's a real opportunity for the state to make sure that places like commercial corridors are well equipped to support housing. Those, I think, are really appropriate places for it. I did want to just mention that one last thing I see in the crystal ball is a continued conversation around tenant protections. The Assembly did the yeoman's job this year in terms of making sure that tenants, landlords, and homeowners were protected from COVID-19 to the degree they could be, not losing their homes. And many of those protections expired on September 30th. So advocates like myself are looking very closely to make sure that, or to watch as those things expire. And if those things expiring has a big effect on evictions, we'll probably come back and ask for some support for those tenants next year. We'll just continue this conversation, I think, but I did want to compliment the Assembly on extending those tenant protections and giving really solid legal footing to tenant protections this year. So I think that's kind of as much as I can see into the future. We'll see some more accountability. We'll see some more affordable housing funding. We'll see a focus on homeownership. I think we'll still see a focus on zoning reform. I don't think SB 9 has ended that conversation. But I'd really like to invite back the panelists, Allison, Marina, and Lisa, so that we can kind of answer some of your questions and have a little conversation about what we all see and what's been happening this last couple of years.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Louis. Sherry is bringing everybody back into conversation. Congratulations on wrapping this up with 10 minutes to spare. I really would like to have a roundtable discussion among all of you and members of the audience.
Mary Ellen, if Tina is still in the audience, or someone from her team, it would be great to have everybody in on the discussion as we wrap up. Another reason why you should all be members of CAL-ALHFA, and we'll put that link in there so that it'll help you make that decision to do so.
Thank you, Michelle. She is the best. Do you have any predictions or hopes as to a softening of the union's position, demanding skilled and trained workforce? If softening, I guess, is the right word. I know that the CHC is talking a little bit about trying to develop some pilot programs where we might invite the labor unions to guarantee skilled and trained where it's available. But do you see that there can be compromise on both sides? I think that we've given a lot to the labor unions and we've lost a lot as a result. Marina, I'll throw that to you first, and then I'll ask Louis what he thinks.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. So, earlier this year in January, we really were trying to move, like as representing the development community, really trying to move as far as we could to find a way to say yes to skilled and trained workforce requirements. And for those who are less familiar, skilled and trained workforce requires that a certain percent of the workers on a given project would have been graduates of an apprenticeship program. And sort of our concern really is the availability of workers that meet that standard. They're just, in all parts of the state, there just aren't enough apprentice graduates yet. And so what we really were proposing is that we would say yes to skilled and trained, so long as there were guardrails included that ensured that in the event the bids don't come in that have that commitment or are able to meet that commitment, there was a way to still move forward with the project while still using whatever tool or funding triggered that requirement. So, and I think the challenge is there just doesn't seem to be a strong sort of acknowledgement from folks on the other side that those guardrails are necessary. And so, you know, we are, I think it's going to be really hard to find a mid-ground where every party is willing to negotiate. So, you know, what we're considering, just, you know, this is very early. I shouldn't even be talking about it, but like one of the things that I've just personally been trying to think about is like, is there a way to kind of create a pilot program with a certain set of land use benefits and funding that does trigger a skilled and trained workforce, but see where that works, see what, you know, where it works, and use that as a better guide for the future, as opposed to sort of triggering it kind of across the board and waiting and seeing that way. So what I would like to see, and we've talked a little bit about it earlier today, is you know, there's going to be a considerable amount of money that the state can spend on a variety of needs. I would like to see a continued significant investment in affordable housing production and some investment in preservation. But within the production dollars, if we could have a significant amount of money that goes to MHP and the CHAP program, the Housing Accelerator program, but then create some of these pilot programs in certain counties, or maybe not, just like open gate and see who takes advantage of it and who can make it work, then we can better see sort of what are the costs associated with it, where does it work.
I think Marina is really at the forefront of this issue. I try as much as I can to support her work on it. But California has about 1/3 of the workers it needs to build the housing that we think California needs. And unions are going to be a really important part of the picture of growing that workforce. They really have to be. You know, I think to Marina's point, the unions have not really moved very far in their negotiating position that all folks need to be using skilled and trained. And there's a growing consciousness in the legislature that that's not going to work for a lot of communities, that skilled and trained requirements are not going to work for a lot of communities because the labor is not there. So I think the legislature is increasingly focused on helping Marina solve this problem and figuring out ways that we can expand the labor force or create, as Marina called them, guardrails or off ramps in which you could still go forward with the benefit. You could still get the commercial rezoning, but if you don't get, for example, you know, anyone coming forward who's skilled and trained eligible to bid on your project, that you can still move forward with the project. So some reasonable off ramps from these requirements. You know, I think it all kind of hinges on the new leadership over at the State Construction Building Trades Council that's coming in next year, and what position they'll take on housing. Housing is important to the trades, but it's frankly not their most important issue area. And I think it'll be interesting to see the degree to which their leadership decides to preserve their credibility in those issue areas and back off from the housing space. That might be wishful thinking, but I think it'll be interesting to see how they calculate their own politics.
I like that wishful thinking, Lois. Lisa, you talked a little bit about ongoing funding for services. And I heard somebody talk not too long ago about how it might be easier to fund these programs for services and also for operating expenses if we didn't call them rent subsidies, even though this would be money that would be going to support the tenants in terms of services provided, as well as rent subsidies to make up the amount of money needed to keep these projects afloat. I heard somebody say perhaps we ought to talk about ongoing operating subsidies for affordable housing projects, and it might be easier, more palatable for the legislature to talk about maintaining the physical plants of these projects as opposed to providing individual rent subsidies, even though the outcome or the use of the monies would be used to preserve and to provide permanent subsidy for them over time. Do you think there's any chance that we could get that kind of legislation, regardless of what we call it, for like more than 5 years of subsidy for these folks?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're starting to see, at least under this administration, a willingness to invest in the outgoing years more than we have in the past administration. So in that sense, it's positive. I also think it's an issue that's been bubbling up for a number of years, and it's not going to go away. So we do need a solution. I think the question is, what we've done in the past is to capitalize reserves. So we're paying up front to some extent. So how is that the best investment? Is there a way to leverage our money better if we don't do that? And I also think a question that I have is, how much money are we talking about? Like, what's the dollar figure? If we have a dollar figure and we can quantify it, it may be a big figure, but at least it's something we can plan for. And so I think, having sort of a sense of that, what's the dollar figure? What do we need to plan for? And then how can we really, build that into the budget outgoing? We'd have a better chance, because I think for finance, it's just like, well, we can't do that. That's way too much money. Well, how much money are we actually talking about? Would be my thought.
Such a good point. It might be a really scary number, but honestly, we need to know what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Allison, congratulations on your new appointment as chief consultant. We're pleased to have you be now co-chief along with Lisa. So that's great. Allison, do you have any other comments on what you see as far as more activity with the Senate housing package? And can you talk a little bit more about SB 7? I didn't get the full breakdown on that bill that was passed.
Sure, and I'm just going to caveat this with, I am not a CEQA expert, and it wasn't a bill that our committee heard, but basically what it does is it provides an expedited legal review of CEQA challenges to certain larger projects.
Thank you.
And as far as, next year, the two sort of major bills that are out there are SB 5, which is the housing bond,
right,
and SB 6, which is allowing residential development in commercial areas. SB 6, it's really just, it gets down to whether or not we can solve this labor question, and just politically what is viable. If there's a deal, I think that absolutely could move, and would be the same with AB 115. If not, I think we're probably going to be here, given that next year is an election year, and I feel like there's just sort of a lot of political issues and factors that we need to realize are in play as well. SB 5, as I said, it's not unusual to introduce a housing bond in the first year and then for it not to go anywhere. I think it's going to be a question of, is there a large surplus next year that the legislature and the governor feel makes sense to invest in housing again? And if that's the case, that maybe a housing bond doesn't make the most sense. Maybe it makes more sense to invest those dollars directly into programs like we did list this year. But if not, maybe that's a conversation for the legislature and the governor to have. I fully anticipate that's going to be a budget conversation. We typically introduce those as policy bills so that there's a process and stakeholders can engage about the right investments, the right programs to finance. But I think that's probably the question. At this time, I just don't have an answer. I'm sure there are folks way above my pay grade having conversations about that. But it's exciting that the Senate has put forward that the notion that we need to be investing, with big, bold numbers like 6.5 billion. So,
Mary Ellen, we did have one question, and it is from Wes Shaw. And it reminds me question I'd like to ask everybody as we wrap up, and it has to do with your wish list for 2022. But this is what Wes Shaw asks. Can we get funding back for the MCC programs? Ours in San Diego dried up. This program makes mortgage payments up to hundreds of dollars less, and it's already there and in place, but not funded. Who wants to jump on that one?
I'm not really familiar with that program, I guess. Is anybody else? I
Well,
don't know that.
I can comment a little bit in that, you know, at this moment in time when the bonds are so limited and so oversubscribed and housing production for low-income housing needs are so high, the state has to prioritize what they want to do most. And the MCC program does not draw down tax credits the way SIDLAC bonds do. And so I think the policy priority of SIDLAC was, this is something where we leverage way more federal resources than the MCC program. And at a time when resources are so limited, we have to pick and choose the things that have the most bang for the buck. And unfortunately, the MCC program does not really rise to that level compared to these other pressing needs.
Yeah. It speaks to the fact that there's just so much need, and even with the additional dollars, so few opportunities to fund everything. Last question is from Julie Romy. It says, what are Lisa's thoughts on AB 1401 that would eliminate parking requirements on all multifamily housing projects, and what's its status?
My thoughts are it passed our committee, and so the assembly signed off on it and sent it off to the Senate. So it was held in Senate Appropriations Committee, and I'm guessing the author is planning to reintroduce and try and push it forward. I think that, you know, I will just say that the parking conversations have evolved dramatically since I've been in the legislature. So like there's so much more willingness to have a conversation about eliminating parking. So I think that's positive, and maybe this is just the kind of bill that needs a second run at it, but I'd open it up to Allison might know better sort of what the dynamics are in the Senate around it, or Lewis might have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it was held in the Senate Appropriations Committee, and the committee chair is Senator Portantino, who tends to be more allied with his local community and tends to be sort of more of a local control advocate. I mean, just candidly, the appropriations process is political. We don't know why bills are held. We're just told the day of, you know, this bill made it, this bill didn't. Sometimes they're for fiscal reasons, sometimes they're for political reasons. I mean, just reading the tea leaves again, I imagine Mr. Portantino probably had feelings about the bill. Personally, I can tell you my chair was incredibly supportive. I believe he was a co-author. So it made it through, you know, with no hitches in our committee. And I believe that there was fairly broad support among other senators. But like Lisa said, you know, the parking conversation has come a very long way. But there are still members that have very strong feelings about local control and things like that. So.
California YIMBY was the sponsor of that bill, and I was pretty bummed that it didn't move forward. Agree with everything Allison and Lisa just said. The author there has committed to bringing it back next year. Assemblymember Freeman's committed to bringing it back. Senator Portantino's stated reason for holding the bill is that he thinks it would cause Wall Street speculation in neighborhoods, and that's a hard reason to accept as a real one. From him, I kind of agree with the assessment. He sticks really close to his neighborhood associations, his local governments, and the NIMBYs who calls office. And so I have a hard time seeing how that bill moves forward from his committee without an additional oomph from above. We'll see next year if there's a change in strategy or if there's an additional oomph from above. But yeah, we'll stay tuned for more on that bill. More will come.
Well, I want to thank everyone for participating, but I would really love in this last minute as a lightning round, we've got all the agencies there and Lewis from CAL-YIMBY. I really would love to know, what is your wish list and how can CAL-ALHFA help? And you know what, why don't we start with Tina, because she is under an alias right now, Chris Sarr. So you might not have known that she was sitting there. But why don't we start with Tina, and then we can work our way through the rest of them. And then we can pass it on to Wendy and Mary Ellen to close us out.
Thank you, Rochelle. I think that there is a lot of white space in the affordable housing industry that we can tap into, and we haven't really thought as closely about it as we could. And that might, and earlier in the conversation, there was a lot of talk about how do we address this affordable housing industry. We got to look at different types of affordable housing in terms of type and structure. We have to look at different ways to capitalize affordable housing. But I also think, and part of my wish list for next year, is that we have to expand the pool of developers who are doing this work. And I think to do that, we have to look at coming up with liquidity solutions for those developers. And that's one of the things that I'd like to see CAL-ALHFA think about. It's not just about the brick and mortar, it's all the pieces that go into building the brick and mortar that we need to do some further examination of. So I would love to hear feedback from CAL-ALHFA on how we might think about doing that. How do we build that pool of folks who are doing infill housing? How do we build up those emerging developers who want to move into financing tax credit projects? That to me is an answer that we just haven't done enough work on.
That's one of the ways that we can help with CAL-ALHFA is by making the local processes more friendly and more easily accessed by perhaps inexperienced potential tax credit developers. Everybody knows this process is a wreck. Maybe we can help with the local government aspect of it, and working with CalYIMBY and California Housing Consortium in breaking down the NIMBYism and the local opposition that gets so much attention to Senator Portantino too.
And to build on Mary Ellen's comments, maybe we can help to connect those emerging developers. You know, I do hear from them about, you know, trying to make these applications and the number of projects they have to have already completed, and the liquidity solutions that you mentioned, Tina. Those are, you know, those are real issues, and they are typically smaller, and they are doing infill, which is really what we're focusing on now. And they seem to be well connected in their neighborhoods and knowledgeable. So maybe what we can do is try to bring them forward more. You know, they probably have less time to do this kind of thing, but maybe we can help with that. But thank you for those comments.
I could go next. I'll go next and say that one thing I would love to see is just a general acceptance within the public that we need more housing, and that is the key to solving so many of our problems, including homelessness. And I don't know what we need. We need like a campaign. We need like a really simple tagline, but we just need to like hire the best PR firm in the state to like just get people to understand it. Cause I feel like that would help with a lot of this, because I think fundamentally that's what voters want, but we cannot seem to convince them that that actually means that you have to accept more housing. And then one thing I just wanted to put a plug in is I think, you know, CAL-ALHFA, you guys should think about what are the barriers for you? You know, what with all the money that's circulating, kind of like what would be your wish list to try and fill some gaps at the local level? Or, you know, everyone talks about bringing back redevelopment, probably not going to happen, but is there a way to kind of fill that hole without doing tax increment, you know, pilot programs, things like that? Because I think that, you know, there's a lot of pressure on local governments to try and solve the problem. And I think we want to be partners and help do that. And so, you know, tell us what would help you do that would be my two thoughts.
Fantastic. I'm all in. That's great. That's great. I love the idea of the campaign. And absolutely, we'll tell you what our barriers are.
Yeah, Lisa actually took mine.
Oh, darn it. Sorry,
It's
I did
okay.
two. I should have just done one. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I was going to say the same thing. I think just a general recognition that the way for us to solve, the housing crisis is we just need more homes for everyone, of all income levels. Obviously, most necessary at the lower income levels, but really just everybody is hurting. I think obviously more money would be great. This is probably an unpopular opinion in the legislature, but I feel like we've done so many legislative changes. Part of me just wants to do oversight. I feel like it would be really great for us to spend some time reflecting on the changes that we've done. I'm sure you have some local folks in here who are clapping right now. We've just made so many changes that I think it would be really great for us to focus on, are those being effectively used? Do we need to be thinking about changes or building upon them, or are our investments going to our highest and best use? I think that would be my wish for 2022. I'm not saying, like Lisa said, I'm sure there's more we can be and should be doing and thinking about, but it'd be nice to have like some reflection as well upon all of the work that we've been doing really since 2017 to make it easier to build, and really understand, how we can build upon those.
Well, that's a webinar. That's a webinar in the making, Allison. I love it. I love it. We have talked at the local level a lot about it just keeps coming, and we don't know how it blends together. We don't know what the domino effects are. One law triggers a reaction in the planning department that's completely different from the finance department. Those are the kinds of things that translate good ideas into local nightmares. And it is time to reflect on what we've got and go with the things that are the most effective. I think we probably can pause with a lot more revisions to the housing element, and look to see how they are being implemented. I like the idea of the housing accountability unit. I really do. I think that's going to give us a chance to see what's working and what isn't. So those are great suggestions for how CAL-ALHFA can help this process and get more of those units built. The more housing, the better.
Don't forget Marina, she's got the best idea.
Oh, no, mine are the same as everyone's, I think the comment that Allison just made is really critical. We had a conversation last week with about like land use and planning with our members, and especially with the smaller cities without like really robust housing departments, like a lot of people don't know what they're supposed to be doing and how to facilitate it, and all of the tools that are out there and what they mean. And so like the more education we can have on like what's already there and how we can use the existing tools to facilitate development, I think would be critical. Like I touched on this earlier. How do we help cities implement their housing plans faster? Right? Like one of the biggest obstacles is getting the approval with CEQA, getting through the CEQA process for those plans. The state created CEQA. The state and HCD is going through your plans with the plans with a fine-tooth comb. And so, if HCD approves the plan, it's affirmatively furthering fair housing. It's meeting all these other major housing goals. And can we get sort of a CEQA validation court at the state level, right, to say this is good? Similarly, like, can we get OPR to say, hey, like this project meets the CEQA exemption, so that at least it gives a little bit more comfort and backbone to the cities to fight some of the NIMBYs. And what Lisa touched on is something that I've been talking about for probably the last 6 years, where like, I think your average Californian has no clue what we're talking about. Like I taught my in-laws are from Bakersfield. I was in Bakersfield like for the first time like ever in like 5 years. I was asked like how work is. And I was talking to them about some of the challenges, and it was a lot of like, wait, I don't really know what that means. And I'm like, okay, let me take a couple steps back. Like, and after like several of those, let me take a step back. my brother-in-law said, "Oh, you're talking about like apartments?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's what I'm talking about right now." Right. And so like, there's just this like real, people have a preconceived notion that when we talk about low-income housing, we're talking about only like Section 8 housing choice vouchers. And like, or whatever their experience with low income means, that's what they think it is. And, or whatever their experience with affordability means that's what they think we're talking about. And so there is this need to kind of open up talk real basic about what we're trying to do. And, sorry to keep droning on, but like I had this interesting conversation a few weeks ago with a local Sacramento affordable housing developer who acquired a motel site to be affordable housing, or PSH. And that motel site previously had been sort of a drug den. And then it was vacant. And so the lot was, people were camping out on this lot. And so they're finally taking this site and they're going to, turn it into real housing for people experiencing homelessness. And the community is up in arms. And I'm like, hey guys, there used to be people sleeping on the street at that site. There used to be people peddling drugs at that site. Wouldn't you rather people be in a home in that site? Yeah. And so, and we hear these other stories of like smaller communities who've been opposed to PSH and then they get it, then a project gets built and effectively eliminated homelessness in that community and everyone's happy. And so like, how do we elevate those stories and sort of how communities have turned around and people who are against are now pro, and how do we elevate those experiences and really shift public, opinion and thought on what it means?
There's definitely some work to be done on the definition of what affordable housing is. I was recently speaking to a church that called me and they basically said, we're trying to do work for, we don't need that kind of affordable housing. We just need housing for people, over 60 years old who are living on limited incomes. And it just had it was a total disconnect. They were like, that's not us. It's the home. They just didn't understand how broad the definition of affordable housing is in the state of California and how it's all sort of interconnected to what's happening at so many levels within their community. So definitely, I co-sign on what the lady, everyone has said, there's a lot of work to do there.
Okay. I think we did have each person talk in the lightning round. Did I hear somebody?
No, I was agreeing with you.
Yeah, I think we did. And this is a high note on which to conclude. I want to thank all of you for participating in our legislative update panel. I want to thank our audience. Those are remarkably high number of people are still with us for participating in our webinar today. And I want to invite you to the ongoing activities that have just been outlined. I can assure you that we're going to work with our partners in creating this public opinion campaign about what housing is and what we are trying to accomplish. It is pretty fundamental. If people don't know what we're trying to do, they're not going to support it. And they're sure going to figure out ways to oppose it when we've seen plenty of that. Anyway, enough of the soapbox. I want to also thank our fabulous sponsors, our board of directors, and our wonderful back of the house managers, Sherry and Jackie and Rochelle. Rochelle is actually the woman of all trades. She's our pitch person, our policy mentor, and our tech advisor. So thanks to all of you. We will see you in person on October 26th and 7th, 2022, and look forward to a number of ongoing webinars and other community engaged activities sponsored by CAL-ALHFA and our partners. Thanks, everybody. It's been great. Bye-bye.
Bye.